Welcome to our virtual audience and again some fabulous speakers to the second and last day of the MedGold Final Showcase event. My name is Katrina Sickle, yes, the same person as yesterday. I'm a moderator and a broadcaster, and I have the privilege of guiding us all through the plenary sessions until we close at 1:30. Now, there is stuff going on after that, but I'll let you know at the end of those three plenary sessions. Now, a couple of updates. Yesterday, what was great on the SwapCard platform is that 196 messages were exchanged. So thank you so much for making use of the platform. That's the point of it. And 196 people online. Now, I think I've been given wrong stats. There was more than 100 people online and 196 messages exchanged. A couple of the key points that I took out of the myriad of rich discussion yesterday was that climate data means different things for different people. So we really did look at everybody in that value chain and all of those different stakeholders with their different demands in the stakeholder ecosystem, but also that data and information are absolutely not the same thing. So we looked at the amount of work and the steps taken to get that raw data into information that is really useful for very specific sectors and particular demands from users. Today, we're focusing on adopting and using innovation tools in organisations. We're doing that this morning. We've got climate and policy making that follows that this morning, and we'll look at the legacy of MedGold within the European landscape and beyond. There's absolutely no point in having a project of this magnitude and all this hard work without really asking the question, well, what's going to happen? Please take the time in the short break between session 1 and session 2, and afterwards, during the lunch break at 1:30, to exploit all the benefits of SwapCard. Very briefly, virtual booths, have a look, meet the MedGold partners, interact through the chat, book a video networking session, visit the digital gallery. You can get all the literature there, the infographics on MedGold, the videos. Of course, you can initiate a discussion in the replicability corner. That's an open space. You can learn more about the vision from sectors beyond the ones that we are discussing at this event. Use the chat. Don't forget, when you're on SwapCard, to interact with speakers. Now, some will be answered directly when those speakers are online, but when they're with me in sessions, your questions, super short please, will get curated by the organisers and sent to us, and we'll see how many of those that we can address. Don't forget, presentations can be downloaded from the platform, bios are available there, and all of this is being recorded. You miss something, you need to go to the loo, you can always see a session again. Oh, and one last thing, there's a share your tab. Share your idea tab. That's for you to air your experiences and opinions. That's that. I don't want to eat into any more speaker time. Here's this session, adapting and using innovation tools in organisations. What are we going to focus on? Absolutely what we call the underlying conditions that are required to adopt and use innovation tools, such as those developed in the MedGold project within diverse organisations across Europe. Now let's have a look who we've got in this session. We should have a slide. Again, it's a session in various parts. It's broken up for you. It's much more accessible and digestible. So take a moment. Of course, I will introduce those speakers when we come to those particular parts of the session. But you can see there, we've got an opening speech. So we do have somebody delightful to frame the discussions and the content overall. His name is Mark Gishen. He is Principal Consultant at Gishen Consulting. He's got a real technical background in winemaking, and he really focuses a lot, amongst many other things, on crafting strategies for managing climate change within the wine industry. Such a warm welcome. Now, we're talking wine and we've got crops behind us, but hey, we don't mind, because of course this event is about so many different food, agri-food sectors. Tell us, you're going to frame things, you're going to kick things off and break the ice. What's going to be the main focus of that presentation of yours?
Thanks, Katrina. Yes, I want to focus on my observations of MedGold and where I think it could go. And it's been a real pleasure listening to what I did yesterday to see the progress that's been made in this project. It's been fantastic. So, yes, I'll go to my slides and straight away. You can find out a little bit more about me on the swap card profile, so I'm not going to say too much. I am coming to you from Australia, so it's evening here. Good morning to everybody there. I am on the MedGold Advisory Board, and I've been a long-term associate with Antonio Gracia from Sograp. So, and my experience has really been a lot on wine technology, commercialization and adoption in the wine sector, with a particular focus in recent years on climate change. And I will try and set the scene for the next 3 sessions and the rest of the day. So these are really some observations from afar and some impressions from having been involved in the project and seeing how it's all come together really beautifully. So I'm going to talk about those few things. So first of all, I just want to give you a bit of a background as to the Australian wine industry and global production. We are only small. We're less than 5% over here of the total production, but we are regarded by many in the world as leaders in technology adoption in the wine sector. Some people would argue that we're maybe inventive and we're also very good adopters, maybe not early, but once we get into adoption, we really take it on seriously. We tend to think that we're pretty poor at that commercialization gap and that valley of death that I'll probably come back to in a short period of time. We have got some really good examples, and I want to give you one of many where I've seen where we have taken adoption and used it for some very good commercial outcomes. And I'm going to talk about the role that Australia had in screw caps for sealing bottles. Corks were traditionally used, and you can see in the picture there, the top, there's a cork sitting on the top of the bottles. And the problem was that it's a piece of bark and it can cause problems, whether it's tainting or oxidation. And this has been going on for many, many years. And Australia did a lot of research into the chemistry of what was going on. And sometimes you get up to 10% of bottles spoiled. So there were moves afoot to try and fix this, to try and avoid this wastage of product. And back in 1970s, the invention of the screw cap was made in France. However, it was commissioned by an Australian winemaker at a winery up in the Barossa Valley. And that happened in the 1970s. For about 30 years, not much happened. Very slow niche adoption. Maybe airlines would have it because it was convenient, but generally it was seen as in the marketplace as low-grade commercial wines. Mm-hmm. So for 30 years, after 30 years in 2000, screw caps were only about 3% of the total market. But a group of winemakers in the Clare Valley in Australia who specialise in Riesling, making Riesling, decided they wanted to preserve their product and wanted to get screw cap in on their bottles to preserve them better. And they formed a little initiative. They started with, I couldn't find an image of the real neck tag, but they used these little neck tags that had all these positive messages about how it's going to maintain the quality and how it was a good means of sealing. You know, like these examples here, taste a winner, win a trip to Portugal. Who wouldn't want that? That's a positive message. And zero added sugar or chemicals, anything like that. But that's the sort of thing they did. And they put a whole lot of their wines into it. Now, at the time, there were a whole lot of competitor closures, not just screw caps, a whole lot of other things, including things made out of plastic, even wool scraps. Now, we had a lot of excess wool here. And they came onto the market, and the people selling them were making often unsubstantiated claims as to how good they were. So it came to the point where a research trial was set up by the Australian Wine Research Institute, which was a highly trusted and highly regarded organisation, both locally and globally. And what they did was to look at a trial of how these things performed. And I guess this is going to be the this is what came out of a lot of research. I was involved in it at the time. But this picture is to me like what MedGold's dashboard is. This is a snapshot that shows you the range of what a wine, how it will age, depending on what closure you've got in it. This kind of sealed the deal. A winemaker didn't have to read the 40 pages of the research paper. They just had to look at one photo and make a decision about what was to be done. And to me, after looking at the dashboard, particularly yesterday while I was in the workshop, this is also a highly visual thing. So this was a really important thing. Critical to that is that it's easy to understand. It was from a highly trusted local source, and Australian winemakers had an attitude of why not? So they then started to take it up. This was then followed by New Zealand, who for their, they used it a lot for their Sauvignon Blanc, mainly coinciding with a massive consumer demand globally. And by 2016, and around about the same now, is about 30% screw caps in the market, close to 25 and 30. So it was kind of an amazing change that did happen. Cork is making a comeback. It's certainly a good product. But that was the story of adoption that I wanted to get across to you. And the key messages are the things that MedGold have been doing right from the start, looking for what the users need, making a simple message and making it usable. So why was Australia attributed with being good adopters? And I put it down to a number of things. This is just my view. First of all, we're a long way from anywhere. We're a very long way from the big production centres where all the suppliers are going to be making all their equipment for sale. So most of our winemakers had to go out and search for the information, talk to their peers, and find out what was the good stuff. What could they really do? We are also a bit less constrained by traditional regulation. We do have some, but it's by no means the same as European. And we just had this collaborative culture and this why not attitude. Why not try it? And that's been a really big thing. Okay, so the key to it, a lot of academics have said it, I've said it before, and again, perceived usefulness, ease of use, and being a trusted source are the important elements behind it. Oops, I think I might have just clicked one too far. I have gone, sorry, let me just go back one. There we go. So in terms of where I see MedGold, it's this extension area that's the important bit. That's where you're at now. We need to really make sure that whilst you might have a reasonable structure for R&D structure and funding that we have here, policymakers have to be aware that all of those elements have to be there. You can't rely on just the suppliers. You can't rely on just the researchers. You need all of them together. And I know that the MedGold team have worked very hard on these areas. Just in closing, my last slide now is what do I see as a possible legacy vision? I think this is where, as I would put it, everyone who wants to use MedGold can use it. And also because they want to do it because users will be more resilient and they'll recognize that. And the key message is how to do that is build on the trust that you've gained through engagement with leaders. Now you've got leaders of all the sectors right in the project. You need to get that second tier very quickly engaged, and that will be the secret to it. You've done everything else really well, and we'll hear more about how you've done that today. But that, to me, that's the key message. So hopefully that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you so much, Mark. And I did give you more time, A, because you just presented in such a lovely way, so clear, and B, because it's so critical that you frame this. Really interesting. You said, listen, this was so easy to understand, very visual, highly trusted local source. That's why, that transfer could be made, what other wine producers could see in the dashboard. Really good advice. in terms of what needs to happen next. One quick question before I move on, and I should have asked this at the beginning. In this title, we have the word innovation tools. How would you define in 2 sentences what innovation tools are? What does that mean? What's our starting point here? You've given a good example, but just define it for us.
In very short, it's a tool that can help you do something in a new way.
Okay, indeed. So you don't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel all of the time. It could be tweaking something. It could be improving something. It could be having
exactly
that
right.
intimate moment on something that exists. So interesting. Thank you so much, Mark. Do stick around if you can, but you've beautifully helped to frame these sessions this morning. And as Mark said, our speakers are going to build on that in more detail. Now, who is that next speaker? We've got one. There were 2 in the programme, but Marta Bruno Suarez, who is a Met Office University academic fellow at the University of Leeds, UK. I know you are speaking for an entire team, including the gentleman who would have been with you, Emmanuel Licoya, but he's not in a position to join in a way that could be very reliable this morning in terms of connection. So you are going to present. Tell us, what are you going to be talking about, Marta? What's the focus of your presentation?
Thank you, Katrina, and good morning, everyone. So my presentation today will be focusing on the work that my colleagues and I within the MedGold team. So it's not just me and Emmanuel, it's also a group of other people that have been helping pursuing this kind of work. And we've been doing this in the last few months. And basically, we are looking at the types of conditions required by other European organizations operating in these agri-food systems to be able to adopt and use innovation tools such as the dashboard. So it aligns very well with Mark's presentation just now. So that's what my presentation will be all about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're going to call for slides, are you not? So
yes, my slides,
ready.
I think someone might appear at some point.
I'll disappear and your slides will appear. They're
Okay,
probably just having a fiddle. You can never have a virtual event without some kind of technical something going on. I'm just going to chat with you. I'm just chatting. What resonated particularly in Mark's opening, by the way?
Well, I didn't listen to all of it because I was elsewhere.
Scandalous.
Yeah.
Look, I'm looking at Mark's face off screen. I'm off screen now. Look, scandalous.
But the innovation tools, the aspects, what is an innovation tool, and the fact that, like you said, we do not necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. A lot of the times it's about improving what's already there, but making it more useful, more usable, more easy to use by whoever is going to be using it. So it's a lot of the times about small tweaks, improving a bit better, understand what's not working and how we can make it work. To inform activities, decision-making, and so on and so forth. So just because we have the word innovation doesn't necessarily need to mean to be a revolutionary solution. It can be about making incremental improvements. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm listening to you off screen, but there you go. You have
yes, my slides are here, so that's great. So I'll just move on to the next slide, please, because So what I'll be presenting here today are some preliminary results from 6 online workshops that we've been pursuing over the last few months. So this is quite recent work. I mean, we've just finished the last workshop, actually not in February. The last workshop was actually in March. So we're still kind of going through all the findings and analysis and all that. And in fact, we actually ended up conducting 8 workshops, but my presentation today focused particularly on 6 because those are the ones that we've been analyzing it. So the aim of these workshops was to help us better understand the potential for adopting and using this type of innovation tools. So in our case was particularly the dashboard that we developed within the MedGold project, and try and understand how that particular tool could be of use, could be potentially usable by other organizations that were outside of the project. So as you heard yesterday, a lot of the work we've done within the MedGold was done with our industrial partners, and they were kind of the end users for the tools, but the next step for us would then to try and understand how we could potentially upscale these innovation tools and apply them in other organizational contexts. So the presentation today is about that, what we found out in terms of our discussions with other organizations. So the workshops were structured around, well, they were online, given that the pandemic and all that, we decided to minimize the risks. And we started by showcasing the dashboard, of course. That was the starting point, showing them what was the tool, what we could offer in terms of the climate information available there. And we've done that through videos and live demonstrations and so on and so forth. And then we went to these kind of more participatory discussions. We've used Mentimeter, to kind of gauge their interests, and try and have a better understanding of how the tool could be of use for them. So the workshops were conducted in different languages as well. I mean, MedGold has been operating over the years with like 5 main languages. So we've tried and really pushed for that. And we had a total of 51 active participants in these 6 workshops. And what I mean by active participants are those that actually provide us feedback on the questions we were asking in the discussion. So we had more participants, but I'm focusing particularly on those that actually provide us feedback for us to work on this, okay? And well, next slide, please, because that's where we're going next. So one of the starting points of these discussions we had in the workshops was to understand the potential usefulness and usability of the tool to them. So that was the starting point, right? Showing the dashboard and then understand, would this be useful or not for them? And as we can see from the graphic there, and these are kind of aggregated findings from the workshop, so across the 6 workshops. But we can see that generally speaking, participants perceive the dashboard as a potentially positive addition to their organization and activities. So, and certain aspects really came across very, very strongly. So there was a general consensus that there was a need for this type of climate information in their organization. So, and that I think it's a really, really valuable finding from this work. Also the fact that this type of innovation fitted within their organizational values and ethos. So it kind of showcases a desire for this kind of innovation, for this kind of information in these organizations, or at least a recognition that climate is changing and they need to act on it, particularly in these very sensitive sectors, agri-food sectors. And then also very interesting as well, this aspect that the recognition of the long-term sustainability benefits that this kind of innovation can bring to the organizations, and the inclusion of climate change considerations within their decision-making. Next slide, please. So we then move into try to understand a bit better what exactly would be the key conditions to allow those organizations to adopt and use these kind of innovations, such as the dashboard, because that was the kind of the crux, the key issue we wanted to understand with these workshops. So how could we consider upscaling these dashboards and apply them in other contexts? And as you can see, again, these are an aggregation of findings across the 6 workshops, and you can see that the results were fairly spread in terms of the types of conditions that participants thought would be needed. And we're kind of thinking that this might be due to a number of different things, one of them being the different types of organizations that were involved in the workshops. Some of them were research institutions, other were private companies, other were government agencies, and all of that means different expectations and different ways of working. So we are half wondering that might be something to do with this. And this is something we're going to continue examining in our analysis as we move forward, but also the role of the participant in the organization and even the country they were based. All of that might influence and dictate why they selected certain conditions as more important than others. But we'll continue with that analysis in the coming weeks. But as we can see from the results, I mean, very interesting, some of the top conditions that were identified related to the training and support of staff to be able to adopt and use this kind of information. And that was the main condition selected across all participants. But also the need for adequate financial resources to allow them this transition from, to be able to use these kind of tools. And the emphasis, which was also a very interesting point for me, was the emphasis on external collaborations, the importance of having a community where they can learn from each other, where they can share experiences. And I think that's a really, really learning point for us as well. Less relevant conditions, on the other hand, were more related to industry standards and government regulations. But again, as we can see, there was quite a lot of dispersion between what people voted for as top priorities. So you can see the numbers there, but then behind it, you have the waves, and that's kind of the dispersions of the votes across the different participants. So that's quite interesting. Yes, 2 minutes. I'm in my last 2 slides. Next slide, please. So quite interesting is that even though, when we asked them to rank across all conditions, they said, top conditions, less important conditions, and so on and so forth. But then we moved into forcing them to rank top priorities. Okay, so from these conditions, what is the key one? And this is quite interesting because when we asked that, it kind of took us to a slightly different set of priorities here, which is very, very interesting. And again, we need to try and have a better understanding of how these fit within the countries where the participants were based, the types of organizations, and their roles as well. But very, very interesting. The top condition was financial resources, ranked as the key top priority to enable their organization to adopt the dashboard. And then again, the external collaborations and industry standards, which were the kind of the follow-up conditions, which raises really interesting aspects, such as, again, the importance of peer-to-peer support and collaboration, as well as the need for support and best practices that can be provided through industrial standards within their microcosmic, setups. And again, interesting, although the training of staff was considered one of the top priorities, when ranked, it came as the bottom one. So there's obviously some kind of tensions and priorities that we need to consider here when we want to think about how to upscale the adoption and use of these kind of innovations outside the realm of the project. Next slide, please, which is my last slide, Katrina. You'll be happy to hear. So overall, the feedback about the potential benefits and usability of the dashboard was very, very positive. Many participants requested access to the platform following the workshop, so they wanted to play with it. And inquired about the long-term plans for the tool. So they wanted to understand what was the legacy of the tool, where we would go from here. And there was also recognition for the need of this type of climate information, which I think it's also a very valuable point to better support and inform their activities, as well as an alignment between this type of innovation and their organization's values and ethos and societal long-term sustainability. So I think it's quite interesting because it shows a move from organizations that are now starting to recognize the importance of this kind of information and the relevance of considering climate conditions within their activities and decision-making. Key enabling conditions, various ones, as I said, but the top ones being the financial resources, external collaborations, and industry standards. And I think this is something we need to delve a bit more in terms of our findings and really understand what we can learn from here and how we can then push this forward. But it raises really interesting questions in terms of how can we facilitate these kind of things? Financial resources, for example, in terms of small and medium enterprises in Europe, how can we support it? How we can promote that? And so on and so forth. So I think I'll leave it there, but this is more or less the findings that we come up to now, and the final report will be available very soon in our website. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, of course I'm not pleased. I'm only here as mistress of the clock. Otherwise, I could listen to everybody for hours, and I mean that genuinely, because it's absolutely so interesting. Let me just ask you one thing before I pass on to our next 4. We're going to have a group chat with 4 different speakers. Just clarify for me this issue very briefly. As in, I'm sitting in a wine bar with you. Just clarify for me industry standards. When you said, what do you mean? What are those? Because they're different stakeholders, including industry and others. What do you mean by industry standards? What are they?
Industry standards in terms of having a set of standards, a set of best practice that can be adopted and used. And obviously, like you said, there are different types of organizations and different types of Therefore, different types of roles and different types of work they do. So obviously the standards will vary depending on types of organizations that you're looking at. But for example, if you consider private companies operating these agri-food systems, they do follow industry standards, ISO 900, being an example, for example. But it's that kind of set of recommendations, guidelines, best practice that can help them better understand how to position themselves in relation to a specific topic. In this case, how to use innovation tools and climate information.
Thank you. I think that's what I needed to hear right there. Okay, so how to position themselves in relation. Okay, thank you so very much. Super interesting. Interesting to find out what active means, to see that range, to say, listen, Kat, it varied according to, what their position in the company was, but also where they were geographically. And what was really interesting for me was that point you made, and you made it yourself more than once, about how they felt this fitted into the values and the ethos of organizations. Because to my mind, you can't get any kind of adoption if something doesn't resonate on that level. So that for me is absolutely critical, alongside what Mark was talking about. Listen, the project is needs to build upon the leader trust as well that it has already generated. Fantastic, so much there to think about. We now have, we're moving from the individual presentations to a group chat, and I'm joined by 4 speakers from diverse sort of sectors, agricultural sectors in Europe. There they are. You might want to wave, because I don't think you've got your name straps under you yet until you're in full screen. Lotte Gabrovitz of Wine Consulting. Lotte, you can wave. You work with small-scale producers. As I remember, you used to also work in marketing, so you've got this really nice, you've got this consumer point of view to bring to the table as well. We have Pierluigi Merigi, so for the CEO of Horta, that develops high-tech solutions for the rational and sustainable management of crops. You can have a wave as well, please, if you can hear me. Okay. Okay, we have also Ilaria Danesi, who is Green Coffee Purchasing Manager at Danesi Cafe. So this is a speaker with a wide knowledge of the whole coffee supply chain, very useful, from the growing on the one end to product development and everything in between and beyond. And we have the lovely Nuno Oliveira, who is CEO of Natural Business Intelligence. This is a business and ecology consultancy specializing in creating options for a natural-based economy and bridging knowledge and practice. And we heard the word bridge yesterday. So also very, very helpful. So I've got some questions for all of you. So let me just grab those questions. And we sort of kept them similar because we thought that would be the most useful way for the audience to see where there's overlaps, where there's differences, the most accessible way to conduct this conversation. So the obvious, I think, first question, given the starting point here, you heard about the various conditions required to adopt and use these types of innovation tools in organizations. Really interesting that training came up as the first, and then, as Marta explained, it actually shifted in the priority areas, but the financial resources, that desire to exchange outside the wider community. What's been your experience and adopting, using these kinds of climate innovation tools, climate information innovation tools in your organizations? Were there any challenges? Were there any barriers that you had to get over? Was everybody yay from the start? Let's hear that, and let's start with Lotte, if we may. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me on board here for this session. So you have mentioned it just perfectly. I'm not part of any kind of organization, rather consulting to like small-scaled and mid-scaled producers. And here comes the tricky task of basically making those kind of tools available and handy to those people. So one of the difficulties to tackle some key challenges would be the communication as first bit. So make people aware that this kind of great tool exists that is so global and is really more precise than anything else that exists so far. and that can be uniformly used basically globally. In order to do that, I mean, Marta has already mentioned before, do some workshops, do these kind of sessions, and continue doing those in order to raise the awareness that something like that exists. The other thing that was I mentioned by Marta as well was the finance bit. So how can we make those tools like available? And I mean, of course, the dashboard is for free to anyone, but still having the tools in smaller organizations, how is it all financed would be like one of the points. And to give the training and support to those people who have newly adopted it to get on and work with it is an ongoing issue which we constantly would have to focus on. And communication is the key here, I would say, because like this exchange between researchers and the final user, and to get this cross-link over, so we get a process of constant like innovation and getting the tools better. These would be like my key points here, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just to be clear, just so for clarity for the audience, when you say, so the dashboard is free, but you still say there needs to be financing, which I should have picked up actually with Marta, but just extrapolate there. So financing for what specifically? So just so our audience is very clear.
It's just to get all the technical infrastructure that is necessary to get access to the tool, I would say. So.
Okay. Thank you very much. And absolutely, for me, it's always, I mean, we're not always the most gifted at sort of taking people along for a ride and training. It requires care and it requires energy, does it not? But hey, if you want a tool to be used and you want those people to become multipliers, they really, you know, all the fabulous technology in the world means nothing if people don't, you know, they're not brought there and they're not helped to use it. So thank you for that. Let me ask the same question to Pierluigi, if I may, please.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for the questions. In MedGold project, Horta develops some functionalities using seasonal forecast. Okay, this is my short presentation. Okay. Sorry, but I have lost my. Okay. The next one, please. Slide. Horta is a spin-off company of the university in Italy, in Piacenza, and we are working with ICT technology for advices to the farmers for sustainability, and we try also to transfer knowledge and research to the farmer and to the supply chain. The next one, please. And in the next slide, we are based in Italy, but we are also working in many countries. We have a lot of basic research and field research, and our approach is real to give advice to the farmers to have the best practices, and we give advices for forecast models on disease, on the pest, on the abiotic stress for the crops. The next one, in the project MedGold, we develop some services on our tool granoduro.net, used by the supply chain Barilla in Italy. And this tool is used by about 6,000 farmers and for 100,000 hectares in Italy. So, and half of the production of Barilla in Italy is based on these systems. That is a DSS, decision support system used by the farmer. So at the end, in this project, we developed some functionalities on crop phenology and using long-term forecast, 6-month forecast, and the advice for the farmer were for crop phenology, for the risk of main disease for durum wheat, and also for seasonal abiotic stress indexes. At the end of the project, we think that this type of experience is very interesting. And to answer to your question, we can say that we decide as Horta to have a specific internal staff with specific background in atmospheric physics sector to develop this type of services for our clients. So this project was very important to appreciate the needs of our stakeholders, of farmers, of breeders, of technicians, of agro-industry, to develop information on a more wide scale of time. So another difficulty we had was to have a training with the users and with the stakeholders how to use this climate forecast advices in agriculture. So is a very key point, this one, to explain the degree of certainty or error of seasonal forecast and how use these outputs. These are the two main aspects we are facing now.
Thank you. Very, very impressive number of farmers using it, and also in terms of Bareilles' production. So congratulations on that. And sorry, I should have given you obviously the opportunity to explain it first. My apologies, but that was very helpful. And thank you also there, clearly saying the emphasis on training cannot be underestimated. I will come back to you, of course. Let's hear from Ilaria Danesi, and let me do this the right way around. Do obviously explain the connection with MedGold, and then the same question, you know, what's your experience, what are your thoughts and experiences on this in adopting these kinds of climate information, innovation tools, the challenges, the barriers? Talk to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, and thanks for getting me involved in these brilliant initiatives. I think that even though coffee is not cultivated in the European region, in our region, I think that it's time to overcome distance barriers, because just considering that European Union is the first coffee consuming ahead of US and Brazil. So it's very important, of course, climate tools, innovation tools also for coffee sector, even though, as I was mentioning, we are not producing. But however, data about diversification, food security, and agro-biodiversity are telling us that coffee farmers, households are struggling to attain enough income to support their family needs, to conserve important plant biodiversity. And so you can imagine how little, if anything, is left to minimize climate change on their farms. Just considering that smallholder coffee farmers produce approximately 60% of global coffee supply, and even a higher proportion of specialty coffee. In recent years, given the importance of these actors within the coffee chain, several multi-stakeholders activities, initiatives have been implemented to support them. We just can mention, for example, the effort to remove barriers to info sharing and favoring the digital solution, for example, to provide smallholder coffee farmers to have access to data, climate data on their farms through indeed digital solution, giving to them data information about farming practices and techniques that are climate resilient, and solutions that can increase farmers' adaptive capacity. Or we can mention as well dynamic and a user-friendly platform, digital platform, providing climate information to producers on current and future climate change impacts on the area and on the region where smallholders grow their coffee, climate suitability of this area, because climate change are impacting also the suitability of the area where coffee actually currently is grown, suggesting also to the user which practices should be implemented. And in the last years, there have been a widespread adoption of voluntary sustainable standards, what was mentioning by Marta, such as rainforest and fair trade and foresee, just to mention the most three important voluntary sustainable standard promoted by NGO, third-party, independent organization, all seeking to set standard, to set best practices in order to enhance social, economic, and environmental sustainability in coffee production. These initiatives.
I need to ask you to, no, just I'm giving you an indicator. I don't want to rush you, but just giving you an indication. You've all anyway ignored my advice, apart from our lovely, apart from Lotte in terms of timing. Go on, I'm just giving you an indication. That's okay. No stress.
Just to mention that that all these initiatives are giving some sign of reaching some goal, but however, the challenges that these initiatives are faced to have a direct and concrete impact are vast. The challenges, we can mention that there is still a very big and great issues of lack of access data, lack of info sharing, lack of capacity by smallholders because they do not have any access to main capital and economic resources. They do not have any knowledge, especially ecological knowledge, to intervene to mitigate climate change. And also, one other.
Maria, you need to round off, my lovely. I'm so sorry.
Okay, the last one is the lack of aligning interest amongst the actors of the coffee value chain, because there is still an unbalanced power in the coffee value chain for its intrinsic nature that is buyer-driven, where profit and power are captured mostly by roasters and retailers. So. These are
sadly that doesn't surprise me at all, and really I'm so sorry to cut you in. It is only in the interests of keeping us and keeping our audience with us in the time. I know that for virtual events, the capacity they have, but very interesting starting point, and I will ask you to expand on that, because you've laid out a lot of the challenges, and it would be interesting to see what actions need to be made, you know, in order to foster that uptake, given the background challenges that you have clearly laid out. But I will come back to you for that, just because I want to let everybody lay out their stalls. So Nuno, same question to you. You know, this is about adopting, this is about finding those barriers and the solutions to those barriers. So what are you bringing to the table, also given what you've heard from previous speakers, going back to Mark, and let us know how NBI fits into all this as well. In 3 minutes, please. Thank you.
Maybe 2 even. Thank you so much, Katrina. It's really impressive to see what's being developed at this level. We at NBI, Natural Business Intelligence, as the name says, we work with nature and we work with farmers and we work with investors. So often these kind of tools are perceived as something that is okay, very interesting, but sometimes they fall between the abstract and the overkill. when I say abstract, it's difficult to understand, to grasp all the types of information and to see how those will be in fact embedded in management decisions from top level to implementation level in the field. And when I say overkill, is sometimes we have so much data and charts and maps and colors and things that make noise that it's kind of hard to implement those in the field. For example, we work mainly with the forestry, wine, and olive oil sector in Portugal, and we work already with some of the most relevant players. And you have very sophisticated companies that already use this kind of information into decision making and planning, because these tools need to be understood as something not only to be used during the season, but to be used during the life cycle of the business. For example, we had circumstances when we had to understand at the level of scope 3, for example, where we should invest in terms of enabling suppliers to adapt to climate change. Otherwise, that would be a risk for breaking the value chain. And we have also questions like where to invest in terms of geographies, new geographies, where we can implement olive production and wine production, but in sectors where they take at least 15, 20 years to take their best fit in terms of production. And in 20 years from now, we'll have different situations from climate change. So to wrap up, we try to understand how these tools can be understood at the top level management decision in terms of managing investment and managing business strategies, but also very important that these tools should be easy to understand in terms of practical points. What can we do today, tomorrow, in a year from now, how we can prepare the transition, the ecological transition, because this takes knowledge, resources, and it takes time. So the better we have this grasp how this technology can be used, the better we can prepare ourselves from top companies to small farmers in terms of enabling everybody to make this ecological transition.
That's super clear. Thank you so much for that. And I really do go back to what you said at the beginning between the abstract and the overkill. You absolutely, and particularly I think when you work on a project of this nature, which has been highly praised by the stakeholders. We've had the words, it is more precise than anything out there. We heard from Mark, who talked about the usability. It's very visual, it's very trustable, but still, as you say, you know, how do I input that info? Oh, there's too much. So you do need to really focus on, as Lotte said, this visibility, the raising awareness, but making sure that training is there. Why use this and how? Super helpful, thank you. I will come back to you. Now, I'm just going to give a heads up. So our next session is not going to start at 11:20. It's more likely 11:30. I will shorten the break. So that's to give a steer to our upcoming speakers and to our audience. We will take a break shortly, but I have one more question to pose to these good people, and I'd like to hear a last word from Marta, because she's been listening patiently backstage, and it will be good to see from her research what she's heard there from these speakers, if she has any thoughts to just share at the end. But let me come back to you and let me ask you, Lotte, I mean, first of all, anything, you know, very briefly that you heard there that sort of resonated with you, coming obviously specifically from another sector? But this is all about action. It's not just about identifying challenges. So what actions could be taken at country level, at EU level, to make climate knowledge and the use of these tools to better inform activities and decision making, I'm reverberating, more mainstream. So first of all, any points from what you heard from your fellow panelists? Second, very briefly, what action to overcome challenges? Lotte, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So I just waited to be able to unmute myself. Okay. Yeah, 2 actions I mentioned before. To raise this kind of awareness, it would be also good to have the staff to go out and to talk to the people, to show them how the thing works. And here again, the financial issues should be solved at some point. So this is the key issue here, awareness, and again, the training, education, support you can give to even smaller companies. This would be like the biggest task to be solved. So everybody has the access to those tools, but also they know they have the support and get the people who go out there and support the different companies and users. So this would be the main task to be solved, in my opinion.
Okay. And finance needs to be an important part of that, and training up those staff needs to be an important part of that as well, obviously. And then being able to follow up on that work internally within an organization. Let me come to Pierluigi, please. Same question to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Two answers. The first one could be a political answer. So I think that European policies and Italian or country national policies can enhance and promote digital agriculture using decision support system for predictions of phenomena, of biological phenomena, and it is very important to increase the use of these tools. Okay, and the second answer could be the demonstration of utility of these types of tools for the farmers to be practiced to the users and to tell them how they can use and which are the advantages for them. This is very important to increase the attention and to increase the use of these systems.
So how would you do those demonstrations of utility? Now that we can, you'd gather people in person, you do it online, which is never made, well, can be practical after hours. I did some moderating at the end of last year after hours for farmers specifically, but how do you see those demos of utility happening?
The utility, yes, because in the case of durum wheat, with the forecast, long-term forecast, we help the farmer to a better planning of fertilization, for example, a best planning of the choice of varieties, because if you have information on which we will do in 6 months, you can have a different choice in the field. So this is really an help, an advantage for the farmer.
But practically, how do you do it? Practically, how are you reaching those farmers? Practically, how are you demonstrating? Just in one sentence, how do you do that? How are you reaching those farmers?
By our services, our DSS, and at the end of the season, we calculated the advantage of the different choice to the conventional choice. Okay.
Just before you go, and this is a question for anyone else, Nuno, maybe you also want to come in. A question did come in, and Pierluigi, again, if you want to just give a couple of sentences answer, if you have some thoughts. The question is, how can one bring climate services to small and medium farmers? And we know that this is the majority of those holdings across Europe, which represent the majority of agricultural holdings, who have limited capacity, limited time. You're saying get people to the premises, yeah? But also online.
I have seen the question, and this is very interesting. It is our job, because we face every day with the little and medium farmers. So, to solve this problem is, I think, is training of the farmers to give more knowledge about the climate change, and give more knowledge about agricultural techniques more resilient.
Okay.
So we need to show them the advantages of.
Okay, hang on a second.
Okay.
Yeah. At the end, I've just seen, and I will come back, and won't just bring back Marsha at the end. Mark's raised his hand and he's still there. So Mark, I'm going to come to you right at the end. I'm just going to close with, and I'm going to bring you both back so that you can have your two penneth. Absolutely. Ilaria, really beautifully concise, please. You laid out some stresses, you laid out, you know, a lot of challenges there. What just two actions do you think could be taken to mitigate those challenges, to promote uptake, and to really provide proper assistance in the cases of those examples that you gave, which are many?
In one sentence, training and capacity building at farm level should be the priority of policymakers. In the coffee sector as well, we have to accelerate the especially remote smallholders farmers, millions of smallholder farmers. We have to accelerate knowledge and technology transfer, enable for them to be more efficient, and in order that they can use these innovative tools. Absolutely. And the other action is enable financial mechanism for credit access. Because it's not only important that these smallholder farmers get access to these innovative tools, it should be implemented also a co-learning processes among all the actors in the coffee value chain. Local agency, local government, researchers, university, NGO, third-party independent organization, in order that this innovative tool could be usable and accessible by farmers.
Thank you. And so engage that whole ecosystem. I think that is absolutely clear. Just to say one thing before I move on to Nuno, let me be clear, because I'm a stickler for getting into the nub of the details. This training and capacity building that you say at farm level needs to be promoted, including remotely. Do you think that training needs to go to the farmers? Do the farmers do it online? Is it a mix of things? Do they go to premises, like Pierluigi said? How, briefly again, how do you see that happening in practice? Does that make sense, my question? There's a farmer, there's a farmer needing the training.
question is for me, Katrina.
So that was questions for you. You mentioned that the farmer needs that training and that capacity building support. How does that happen? At the farm?
At the farm level.
Online?
No. We of course it should be used, and it's worth to use digital solution and platform in order to. But we have to consider that. In most cases, mostly smallholder doesn't have access to social network. Okay. They do not have connection. So of course that at least at the beginning, this transfer knowledge should be implemented on the ground at farm level, because these smallholders are living in the remote area of the globe.
Thank you very much. Probably was a silly question, but good to clarify on my part. Nuno, a question to you. Let me give you two possibilities. The actions. So what are the actions that need to be taken? And also, if you wanted to come in on this question that came in from the audience there, how can you bring those climate services to these small and medium farmers, which really do represent the majority of agricultural holdings? Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. The discussion has been really interesting and motivating. First, I'm an ecologist, and since I'm an ecologist, I like to look at these systems like ecosystems. And one thing that I really believe is that we have to adopt something like a symbiotic blended learning, because most of these farmers, they are aware of what they can do at site level. We are working with very, very practical issues like managing soil plant covers, managing wetlands, managing scrublands, woodlands, restoring stream-side galleries, restoring the ecological features of the terrain, because those features will be the ones that will enable the farmers to actually adapt to climate change. Yeah. So it's very important that at the end of the day, we know that we are implementing actions that will really adapt the production to climate change. And we're talking about climate change, we're talking about issues with water, heat waves, warm winters, and things that are very specific. And often we see ourselves, the consultants are like keystone species, but they are not the real ones implementing the actions in the terrain. So we need to create these mechanisms of feedback in terms of what we advise, but very important, we must be able to listen and to understand and to learn from farm managers from all levels in terms of knowing what really works, what it doesn't work so well, because most of these actions, to be practical, need to be understood under a context that it's broad, like climate change and the time that climate change takes to develop. But at the practical level, if we don't enable this a very interactive blended learning approach with the farmers, we can have all the models in the world, but we'll fail, because in the ecosystem there's work to be done. Unless we enable all farmers, big, small, little, large, to implement true, real measures of climate change adaptation, we will fail no matter the models.
Thank you. And I sort of feel, I mean, you are so right. I just always feel so sad that we even have to push this to say, we need to listen better. We need to ask for feedback. This symbiotic, you called it interactive, this blended learning, it's kind of sad, isn't it? Because it should just be the order of the day. Okay, I'm going to park that unless you wanted to say one sentence, because I'd like to bring back Marta and Mark on this issue of, I mean, you partly actually answered it, bringing the climate services. Was there anything else you wanted to say in bringing to those small and medium farmers? Or
let's get practical.
Let's get practical. Okay, before I invite Marta and Mark back, I can see Lotta, yes, you wanted to come in there, please.
Yeah, so sorry. So one last thing concerning this, how to bring climate services to small and medium like farmers. I would really start with the educational bodies to implement training and teaching about this is existing and this is a burning issue. So I mean, they are the winemakers of the future. The students of today, they will make the wine in the future, and if they know already about in their training, it's like the first step is done. And I think that's one of the big keys, in my opinion. So
thank you. Very good point made. Oh, I'm reverberating like a cyborg again, sorry. Very good point made. And also I would say, but I think this is obvious, the farming associations, I mean, they also have a responsibility to, they are representing the voice of farmers, they are informing, so they have a very key role to play. I mean, as I said, and as I said to everybody, I genuinely could sit around a table for hours with you and talk. You've been splendid, thank you. Do jump back on SwapCard at some point today in case speakers want to interact with you, online. So kindly give them that opportunity. Let me remind our audience that you can do that. But before I close, I'm going to ask these lovely four to take, a break off screen. I'm just going to briefly invite Marta and Mark back. Mark had his hand raised. Marta was nodding at a lot of things backstage, I can see. So if the lovely technical team can bring back Marta and Mark, I can ask for a last minute or so for each, and then we can go into a break at 11:15. So Mark, you raised your hand there. You wanted to come in. Was it in answer to the question that came in or something else, or both?
No, really about the question. I think I work a lot with very small guys, but I'm also quite associated with the larger guys. So my perspective is, I want to give you some perspective here as to how you do it. It's that number 2 point in my last slide, in the second last slide, where I said the extension bit is the hard bit to do. We've talked a lot about that today. That is really critical. It's going to sound really very Aussie on what I'm about to say, but the way you do it with growers is barbecue, bacon and eggs breakfast. You get them out there that way. That's how you get into them. And with winemakers, small wineries, it's probably a bit more like a pizza and beer. But whatever happens, it's who goes out and does it is a policy issue. For smaller guys, there's a bit of market failure. So the government has a role through the agricultural departments to get someone out there and organise the barbecue. And when it comes to the very large corporates, they usually have their own in-house people, but they've got to do exactly the same thing. It's the policy. You've got to have that policy. So there's the thing, bacon and eggs or pizza and beer.
I love that. And just before I turn to Marta, anything else? Here we go. So just in case you want. Oh, okay. I was just reading. That was nice. I had a message in the chat. Anything else that you wanted to comment on? Because there was a lot there. Anything that you think, right, Kat, the audience just needs to hear this point that wasn't raised, that I picked up in the conversation, or underline anything? That's for you, Mark.
Oh, not me. No, I was going to hand over to Marta.
You are a gentleman.
You don't want to listen to me. I could go on for hours about.
I know, but you are so interesting, truly, and I could listen to you for hours, genuinely. Right, Marta, I'm giving you the last word then.
Thanks, Katrina, and sorry for rambling earlier on in my presentation.
You did not ramble.
I get excited about this.
Far from rambling, it was very, very clear and concise. Yes.
Anyway, just a couple of points, because I think a lot of the really important points have been raised by our panel speakers. Really interesting things. I think I'll pick up on two things. One was the issue of ownership that was raised yesterday by Antonio Grassa, and I think that really is something, and it kind of links with the point that Nuno was making in terms of feedback, working together, collaborating. Is not a top-down approach. It needs to be bottom-up. They are on the field, they work, they're very busy people, they are bombarded by information, loads of tools out there. So how to reach out to them and how to carve that space. And I think ownership is really important, and that requires time for them to test the tools, for them to gain trust in the tools, because they are doing very risky decisions. They don't accept very easily, information coming from a tool without testing it cautiously. So it requires time. And that's something we need to be aware of. It takes time for these tools to, get into the kind of their DNA practice and stuff. That's on the individual organizational level. And then at the top macro level, there's some things we can do as well. And it has been raised by our speakers as well. The fact that we need resources for training, for raising awareness, for supporting existing networks and collaborations that are already out there, associations that are already doing a lot of the work with farmers on the day-to-day. So I think it needs to be a dual approach to this, right? Working very closely with the people on the field, making these really important decisions, but there are also decisions at a higher level. Absolutely. And the kind of resources we need to bring in as well. So it needs to be a strategic approach, but also give it time for people to gain trust in these tools, because they are making very risky decisions in their day-to-day lives. So I just wanted to wrap up there. Keep it simple.
I think it's a very good comment, because often again, when one is so excited about a project or a tool, one is right behind it and here, look at this, and how can they not see the brilliance? But you are absolutely right. Time, these are risky decisions. There is financial aspects involved. There is capacity involved. So time, which is always a difficult one in terms of the climate challenge. We have these tracks, but indeed. Okay, well, it is 11:15. Let me just say the lovely Nuno said that he does have a presentation. Well, he sent it to me on how to get practical. Nuno, maybe that's something that you could share on Swapcard. If it's not there, please do make it available, because there is a repository of materials on Swapcard. If people don't know about this, they have not been listening to me, audience. Now, over to our audience. I'm going to take a break for 15, not 20 minutes. So we come back at 11:30. And then we've got a 60-minute session in which we talk climate for policy making. So we're extending our narrative. We've touched on this many times. I mean, Mark talked of policy, but also in a wider way of an approach and a thinking, but a government responsibility. So let's look at that nexus there. I will explore with 4 speakers from the FAO, from the Commission, DG Research and Innovation, the International Olive Council, and the European Centre for Development Policy Management, that critical climate and policy nexus, how we bridge the gap, how information can be packaged in the right way, in a timely way, to really help support and implement decarbonisation, green policies adoption, the works. So hopefully we'll have some success stories, we'll identify some gaps. But now, in the next 15 minutes, eat, tweet, hashtag #MedGoldShowcase, refresh yourselves. Thank you so much to all those fabulous speakers. You've been brilliant. And Marta wanted to say something, I think, at the last minute. Did you, or is it?
No, I was just clapping. Sorry.
Oh, you were clapping. There was a clapping hand. Look, I saw a little hand raised there. So good people of the audience, take a break and we'll come back for the next 60-minute session in 15 minutes. See you then. Thank you so much.
Yo he aprendido básicamente de café y de las condiciones en que el café se produce y los efectos que tienen los climas y todos los análisis que hacen los científicos, porque no conocía y he tenido ese soporte durante 2 años de MedGold.
MedGold is a great example of how you can combine both satellite-based Earth observation products and climate modeling to support resilient activities, for instance, in the agricultural sector, in the case of MedGold. And this approach, the approach taken by MedGold, is currently being promoted by GMV, by our company, in our activities with our IFI partners, in particular with the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. We are developing services following the standards, the procedures initiated at MedGold.
The replicability of this tool is possible in case the specific needs are observed, and also in case that the resources are available, meaning the financial and human resources.
And this can also be transferred actually or replicated to other regions across Africa, because in Africa we are increasingly experiencing extreme conditions such as drought, and they are now more intense and prolonged. Therefore, these climate services will be beneficial across the entire region.
Yo he aprendido básicamente de café y de las condiciones en que el café se produce y los efectos que tienen los climas y todos los análisis que hacen los científicos, porque no conocía y he tenido ese soporte durante 2 años de MedGold.
MedGold is a great example of how you can combine both satellite-based Earth observation products and climate modeling to support resilient activities, for instance, in the agricultural sector, in the case of MedGold. And this approach, the approach taken by MedGold, is currently being promoted by GMV, by our company, in our activities with our IFI partners, in particular with the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. We are developing services following the standards, the procedures initiated at MedGold.
The replicability of this tool is possible in case the specific needs are observed, and also in case that the resources are available, meaning the financial and human resources.
And this can also be transferred actually or replicated to other regions across Africa, because in Africa we are increasingly experiencing extreme conditions such as drought, and they are now more intense and prolonged. Therefore, these climate services will be beneficial across the entire region.
Yo he aprendido básicamente de café y de las condiciones en que el café se produce y los efectos que tienen los climas y todos los análisis que hacen los científicos, porque no conocía y he tenido ese soporte durante 2 años de MedGold.
MedGold is a great example of how you can combine both satellite-based Earth observation products and climate modeling to support resilient activities, for instance, in the agricultural sector, in the case of MedGold. And this approach, the approach taken by MedGold, is currently being promoted by GMV, by our company, in our activities with our IFI partners, in particular with the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. We are developing services following the standards, the procedures initiated at MedGold.
The replicability of this tool is possible in case the specific needs are observed, and also in case that the resources are available, meaning the financial and human resources.
And this can also be transferred actually or replicated to other regions across Africa, because in Africa we are increasingly experiencing extreme conditions such as drought, and they are now more intense and prolonged. Therefore, these climate services will be beneficial across the entire region.
Yo he aprendido básicamente de café y de las condiciones en que el café se produce y los efectos que tienen los climas y todos los análisis que hacen los científicos, porque no conocía y he tenido ese soporte durante 2 años de MedGold.
MedGold is a great example of how you can combine both satellite-based Earth observation products and climate modeling to support resilient activities, for instance, in the agricultural sector, in the case of MedGold. And this approach, the approach taken by MedGold, is currently being promoted by GMV, by our company, in our activities with our IFI partners, in particular with the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. We are developing services following the standards, the procedures initiated at MedGold.
The replicability of this tool is possible in case the specific needs are observed, and also in case that the resources are available, meaning the financial and human resources.
And this can also be transferred actually or replicated to other regions across Africa, because in Africa we are increasingly experiencing extreme conditions such as drought, and they are now more intense and prolonged. Therefore, these climate services will be beneficial across the entire region.
Yo he aprendido básicamente de café y de las condiciones en que el café se produce y los efectos que tienen los climas y todos los análisis que hacen los científicos, porque no conocía y he tenido ese soporte durante 2 años de MedGold.
MedGold is a great example of how you can combine both satellite-based Earth observation products and climate modeling to support resilient activities, for instance, in the agricultural sector, in the case of MedGold. And this approach, the approach taken by MedGold, is currently being promoted by GMV, by our company, in our activities with our IFI partners, in particular with the World Bank and the
And a very warm welcome back to our audience and to our next set of speakers, to this second of 3 plenary sessions in which, as I said before the break, we are going to talk climate for policy making, critical. Who is with us in this next hour? Let us see. At the moment, I have 3 of the 4 speakers with me, but if we can put the slide up, our audience can just take a moment to see who, well, oh, not even a slide, we're here. Here we are all on screen. So you've got to have your, I'm prepared to be seeing faces on ladies because there was no name slide. So let me just say, and you need to raise your hand. So there we have, you can see from the FAO, we have Adriana Ignarchuk. And Dr. Ignarchuk is a senior economist at the Agri-Food Economics Division of the Food and Agriculture Organization. So she's leading the economic and policy analysis of climate change team, a big job. Also, we have Onelika Andrade, who is Climate and Energy Policy Officer at the European Commission, DG Research and Innovation, and there she works broadly on climate adaptation research and innovation policy, but in the past has covered issues or files on clean energy, agriculture and forestry in the Directorate General for Climate Action. And we also have with us Hannah Knappen, who is Head of Climate and Green Transition Programme at the European Centre for Development Policy Management. Now, the ECDPM is a leading independent think tank wanting to make policies and helping make policies in Europe and Africa work for inclusive and sustainable development. And Hannah specialises in adaptation within the context of Europe-Africa relations, with a special focus on agri-food systems, but also climate finance. Now, we do have a 4th. We are trying to find him. He's gone absent without leave, Jaime Lillo from the International Olive Council, but I'm not going to introduce him until you see him in vision. Now, I've got a few questions for all of you. So, you know, I'll jump between and I'll give you a clear steer who I'm coming to. And as I said to you, if you want to raise your hand at any point to jump in or make a concise comment, you're welcome. And let me remind our audience, you know the drill. If you have a question for us, you've got to stick it in the chat on Swapcard. It comes to us where we are in the session, but you've got to keep it short. All right, Adriana, which is the best method or approach, however you want to call it, to measure and evaluate the impacts of policies, and which indicator or indices can be used? So give us a feel for that first, please.
Thank you, Katrina, and good morning, everyone. It's really a great pleasure, and it's even greater pleasure to be in a women-led panel so far. And it doesn't happen that often, you know, in the policy world. So, but now referring to your question, you know, first of all, let me just say how important it is to measure the effects of policies. And I have to say that, you know, within my career for more than 15 years of working with and for policymakers for different international organizations, I have to say we don't really do it, you know, enough. But sometimes we don't do it enough because of particular reason. It's just simply often not easy. But, you know, if we are to measure the policy, you know, there's nothing like a one fit it's all, of course. So first of all, we really have to understand which kind of policies we want to look at, and on what and on who are we going to, you know, kind of measure the effect of those policies on. So that's very, very, very important. And there are different ways, and depending on, you know, first of all, you know, what and how and for who, how much time do we have and how much resources do we have? Because it's obviously, you know, it costs money to look at you know, kind of, you know, to measure anything. So there are different type of ways. So one, for instance, is just to have a look at the generic information, you know, on how the policy influence the generic markets, income, kind of generic well-being, and this type of indices already exist, and those are usually, you know, kind of at the national level indices. And for instance, here in FAO, a MAFA program provides such a set of indices mainly for developing countries. OECD does that for the developed countries. So those are relatively generic, but requires, you know, kind of a machinery behind. If we are looking at the policies that are rather specific, targeting specific group or target specific, you know, sub-region, One may use particular econometric methods. Those are, giving you often, much more detailed answer to, how particular policy affect particular group of people and what it affects in particular. Those are, however, a little bit more data mining. You have to do much more data mining for this activity, and they take a little bit of time and kind of monitoring and gathering additional data. And if we don't have time for that, or if we don't have this particular set of information, we may still kind of refer to modeling those, whether this is a general equilibrium models or partial equilibrium models. Those will have, shed some light on particular indicators, including maybe food security, environmental effects. However, those are also kind of, they look at the kind of simplified reality in a way, so they can kind of provide you a broader view. So just to summarize, there's no, one fits it all approach. You always have to think about, what do you want to measure, on who do you want to measure, and whether, you want to measure direct or indirect effects. So, however, I just want to reassure you that they are different methods. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And obviously, just underlining what you said at the beginning, it's not done enough for a variety of reasons, often because it's just simply not easy. And I think that is a kind of a common, I think, a shared knowledge that data, not just sort of getting the raw data, but actually treating that data, determining if it's quality data, how to use it for whom, is very challenging. And I'm going to come to this issue of data
Absolutely.
with our next speaker.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, Jaime, welcome. I'm not going to, oh, well, there you are. I was about to say, I'm not going to bring you to screen. I'm going to punish you for being late, but hey, you are on screen. So before I come to Anelika, welcome, Jaime Lillo. You are from the International Olive Council, an agricultural engineer, but you've also been in Spanish administration and the European Commission, and now hold the Deputy Executive Director position in the International Olive Council. So a warm welcome to you. I will come to you in a bit. I'm just going to sort of stay with the order that I anticipated at the outset, and I'm going to come to Anelika. Now, there are two ways here. Either we can just start with that question, the same one, how do you see the BEF method and approach to measure and evaluate, and what you heard there from Adriana, but also this question of information and data sets. Mm-hmm. Now, so I don't know which information, which data sets are needed to design these transition actions and policies. I can let you take your time and sort of look at both, because I think they're linked, and I can give you the sort of 3 minutes. So why don't I do that? And don't speak too fast, because Adriana and I are fast speakers, so don't speak too fast.
As a Spanish person, also a fast speaker, so I'm trying to pace myself here. There are two angles to this, and it's true, the data, and coming from research and innovation and trying to get the latest of the latest on climate. We're a bit obsessed with data sometimes, and we want more, and we want more certainty. But the fact is that sometimes we need to stop and try to work with what we have. And at this stage right now, with all the advancements on modeling, on climate science, we have a lot of data. I believe that the key data, pieces of data, when it comes to designing transitions, especially at the local level, we need seasonal forecasts. They're key to design strategies, and we also always need a higher resolution when it comes to the models and to understanding what's happening at the local level, because climate adaptation, where I work and where all these climate services try to target, needs a high degree of detail onto what is going to happen in a certain location. So these are two pieces of data and information that we really, really need. But I believe there's enough that has been done. And it is good that we need more projects like MetGoal and others focusing on, okay, we have the data, now let's use it, let's distill it, let's simplify it, let's put it to good use to our economic sectors. And I think to step a bit away sometimes as a science, I'm a scientist, but I work on the policy side, but I feel like scientists sometimes are way too focused on getting more data, more information. Let's destroy the uncertainty. Let's get there. And the fact is that we have a lot and there's a huge urgency to act. So let's try to act. Let's try to dumb down what we have, let's simplify what we have, and visualize what's coming and how we can act around it. So I think more than just more data, we need to find methods to deal with uncertainty, with the margins of error. You know, we know there might be flooding, then we know there might be a lot of rain in certain regions. So instead of getting, to what degree do we know that, is how can we deal with uncertainty? How, if there's a margin of error, should we just go for the worst case scenario? For example, I was in the Netherlands last week talking about water management, and they explained that, you know, sometimes we need to go for the worst case scenario when there's uncertainty. And perhaps that's a way of dealing with that. For other countries, for others, for example, from where I'm from in Spain and Valencia, I believe that they don't go for the worst case scenario, but they go for a mid-range scenario. And this, I think, is highly needed. More than information data sets, is methods and tools to deal with uncertainty that comes with the data that we're getting, so we can take action faster and we can design plans around it. And linking back to the indicators, it is true what Adriana was saying. We don't do it often enough because it's complicated and sometimes it's challenging and it's a bit fluffy sometimes because it's not highly quantitative, and finding all of this is really complicated. So, and sometimes we want more data as well. For the indicators, we usually want more data. So we do go for circle. We don't have enough data to measure this. We don't have data to even predict what we should do, so we don't measure it at all. So I think it's more about trying to go for it. There are ways around it. There are variables we already know.
Okay.
So let's use what we already know.
Okay, thank you.
We can measure, yeah. So let's start from the basics and then build it up. I think that tends to be a good approach to not draw a hold and not go and engage.
Okay. Let me just bring Adriana. I'm going to come to you, Hannah, just momentarily. Adriana, you wanted, can you, if the technical team can just leave us all together momentarily. Adriana, you wanted to come in with a quick comment there, I think.
Yes, yes, I think it's very true, Anelika. There's a lot of information being gathered. However, my point is often that those information are not being linked. So we might have a lot of beautiful information on, you know, a forecast. But how people react to forecasts, whether, you know, which kind of different, you know, how different cohorts of population react to forecasts, how can you provide the information so they are actually, you know, really using the information rightfully? There is a very big, you know, gap, you know, in that. So there's, you know, we might have a lot of technical information, we might have scattered information, but to have a good socioeconomic data, it's really still not easy, which really comes to a surprise. So just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hold all of those thoughts. I'm just going to open up to Hannah, if I may, and come with a different question, because all of this data, which informs policy making and has to be packaged in the right way too, for less aware, less knowledgeable, very busy policymakers. It has to work on the ground. That's the whole point. It has to benefit. It has to benefit the producers, the farmers. It has to benefit, as we heard yesterday, ultimately society at large. So are there some key elements that you think make a policy adaptable to the local scale, you know, the local scale heterogeneity, so that scale, and then it can become, you know, much more relevant at country level? That's kind of sort of looking at the adaptability. And also, let's just extrapolate a little bit, let's expand into looking at how can a policy be so robust that it can face contingency events, because goodness knows we've got some examples of those at the moment, from COVID. We've got famine, we've got drought, we've got pests, but we've got COVID, we've got military conflict now impacting on food security. So your thoughts, please.
Thank you. A very big question. It's in fact a twofold question. Now, I was listening with great interest to what the two previous speakers were saying exactly on data and how difficult it is to assess it. And then, of course, next question, as you're asking, how do you then translate this into policies, into action at local level, at national level? I think ideally, of course, it should be a combination of top-down and bottom-up processes. So by top-down, I mean that in a country, you need to have a robust national policy framework that sets the scene on how will the country deal with climate impacts from an adaptation, from a mitigation point of view. And of course, you also need to have an efficient institutional setup in which all the line ministries are involved with climate action. And then at the same time, you need bottom-up processes. And this means so having efficient local governance, even local success stories, good local practices that then can be scaled up. So you provide lessons for other areas in the country and so on. So for these bottom-up processes, you need to have effective decentralization, local inclusion, local authorities that have autonomy to make decisions, that also have finance to take action. You need to have a well-functioning civil society, grassroots organizations, and so on. Now, I want to take you to Tunisia, because it's a country where I have worked, where I did research, and maybe explain a bit to illustrate what I just said with an example, because you see that the local food system is quite vulnerable. It's the way it's been set up is unsustainable. It's not very resilient. And so the question is then, what is blocking this resilience in the food system? I think, like you already referred to, Tunisia has, like many other countries in the Middle East and North Africa, an important agricultural trade relation, especially for cereals, in particular wheat, with Ukraine and a few other countries. Obviously now, since the war in Ukraine, there is a lot of concern about food security. Higher food prices can lead to instability. So you have this, and then at the same time, from a climate perspective, there are impacts on its own national wheat production, so its own food supply, and also olive production, to give another example, which is an important export product. Now, at the same time, Tunisia may fall victim to transboundary climate impacts because it's so food import dependent from other countries. You see the same in West African countries that are highly dependent on rice imports from Asian countries. So what if there are climate impacts on production there? What does it mean? So you see, these are just like, especially the factor of food import dependency makes a country like Tunisia very vulnerable. And despite knowing this, why is it so difficult to make the system more adapted to climate impacts, more sustainable, more resilient? I think it has to do with poor governance and incoherence of policies, and that's also why it's so difficult. What I just said, to make policies adapted to the local level. We see that that's a second point. These climate risks are compounded by long-standing inequalities between the interior, rural regions, and the more affluent coastal areas, cities. And so that means that policies are not really adapted to local realities. There is less of a political government attention to these areas. And my last point is that there is a national market and trade system that's really strongly geared towards the export of agricultural goods, in particular olive oil, for which monoculture farming systems have been set up that deplete natural resources. And less political or attention also from Ministry of Agriculture, not in the inability to set up a strong agricultural policy that allows for more food self-sufficiency. And so that brings me to the last, your second question, what makes a policy so robust to face contingency events? We can also, let me answer by saying what makes it not robust. So because it has to do with one-sided policy making, the lack of territorial approaches. There is now a lot of talk about that, integrated systems thinking. I think you see that in the case of Tunisia, again, they had a new constitution since the revolution in 2014 that has incorporated climate action as a permanent feature on paper. But at the same time, you see, that's what I mean, to give an example of this one-sided policy-making approach. The climate response has been strongly emphasized in the energy sector because this can open the door to foreign investments, and less so in favor of adaptation, agriculture. So.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And I think, and that point, and that's a little bit also where I was possibly clumsily getting at in this issue of getting the right information to the right policymakers. And often I hear in different, well, you gave examples of Tunisia and also in Africa, even I hear in, certain member states, you don't have sometimes the right ministry sitting together in order to ensure this mainstreaming, which then has an impact on governance. And you talked about, poor governance is just really a poor ingredient for creating resilience and robustness.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. I will come back to you. I'm going to sort of take a step back actually in a way and come at this a bit more up now, sort of top down or a chapeau. So if I can come to Jaime and just in a couple of minutes, please, just highlight for us as you see it, because I could have asked this as a first question, that nexus between climate information and policy making process for agriculture. Just, pin a few key points on that relationship.
Thank you, Katrina. And first of all, sorry to step in this debate of women policymaking, which is great to see these extraordinary speakers discussing about policymaking, agriculture, and climate. And yeah, regarding my experience in policymaking, when you are in agriculture and climate change, there is a first dilemma, first conflict to be understood and well balanced, which is between conserving the planet, the environmental approach. The climate change should be the first priority. How ambitious are we in our objectives to reduce emissions, so on. And on the other hand, we need still to produce food. We need still to produce food, and we cannot depend on third countries for that. We are learning that sadly those days. So we need our farmers producing enough food to provide food in a reasonable prices to our populations. This is now at the heart of the political discussions, and you can see we have the new Green Deal from the European Commission, very ambitious, very in line with the climate change objectives. But on the other hand, the need to provide food for our population without depending from third countries and in a reasonable prices. In Europe, we are, in my opinion, leading this debate and also matching very close to this good balance, but this is essential. For me, the next step is we need to address this issue based on science, knowledge. I think on Elika touched this issue of too much information. We need to be clear of what we know based on science, on clear ideas, and we cannot drive the policy by beliefs, stories, this is good, this is bad. We need clear understanding of how are the process of production, how is the bioeconomy, how is the system, how is the climate. And based on this science, we need these information tools. And information tools are important for the whole chain. From the farmers, they have to face new pests, new changing irrigations, temperatures in winter, but we also need to provide this to consumers. Consumers need to know that an olive oil coming from olive trees, like is the olive oil, is not the same for the climate. The olive oil coming from annual crops like soya or maize or even sunrise crops. So this is a little bit the framework I would like to react to your question.
Thank you so much. And there was, in fact, we'll deal with that in a minute. I have seen a question come in and you can all have a glance at it. That's come in to say, what can policymakers do to encourage the practical use of climate services at all levels? For me, one thing is just understand themselves the use, but that's something that you can all, perhaps you can all give an answer to, that first. I mean, do you want to, and I mean, one sentence, please, answer the question. What can policymakers do to encourage the practical use of climate services at all levels? Jaime, do you want to just give me an answer to that?
Yeah, but I'm sorry, Katrina, this cannot be solved in one sentence. It's
All right, 3 sentences, I know.
But I think, as I say, information is key. And I think the consumer is also a key player. So we need we need to be clear on that. I mean, farmers are ready to produce what is on demand. If there are clear signs, and we have already the legislatory framework there, but at the end of the day, we need consumers in their choices, because you can see, and this is a key role that we all have to be in mind. We can have very good goals and tools and indicators, but at the end of the day, farmers need a sustainable business based on selling what they are selling and who is buying and what are they paying for.
But then there is also, and you are right, and the consumer, and I'm not sure anyone, but actually you might, so I'll just say this, we can see that changes there. We can see that evolution in terms of consumer demands. I've heard about it from retailers. I've heard about it from producer organizations. The issue that you just said of affordability and cost, it's also understanding, does the consumer take on some of the cost? If there are higher costs for farmers, that's obviously key here. Keep us all, please, lovely technical crew, just keep us together so that everyone can answer this question. Adriana, you wanted to have a word, and very happy for Hannah and Annalika to respond to this question. What can policymakers do to encourage the practical use of climate services at all levels? Adriana.
I think I'll probably rephrase this question on how they can do, rather than whether they should, encourage everybody. It's in everybody's interest to use the climate services to improve their situation, right? And to be prepared. I would say that how they can message, or how they can target, that would be the issue actually, rather than not. I think most of the producers are simply, kind of economic agents, and they will use every information possible if it would enhance their situation. It's just the messaging, is that what kind of message they will understand so they can prepare, for different climates.
Thank you very much. And given that they're bombarded with a lot of information and messaging, as we heard in the previous session, Annalika, do you want to have?
Sure. Yeah, and it's not an easy answer to. It's not easy to compile it in one sentence, but I think what Jaime was mentioning of the consumers, this is key, because as Irena was saying, the local actors, the producers, are using it more and more because they're affected by climate change, and they're trying to find solutions as to how to get above this. But then the embed of the supply chain is where we need to trigger this a bit more. And as policymakers, we can work more at the local level, because we work at the EU level and we use climate services per se, but then it doesn't trickle down to the local level. So I believe that if there's an incentive at the local level to use climate services, and also policymakers at our level, we can make information and the services more accessible and less and more cost efficient, because sometimes the services are really expensive and we cannot expect a consumer to be paying for this. So we need to facilitate this, and it should be embedded in perhaps our climate adaptation policy, that getting the consumers somehow and getting this access and affordable applications, information to the consumer.
Thank you. Hannah, what resonated there for you in those responses, and would you come at this in another way, or what would you like to add?
Yeah, what I would like to add is that it's first of all difficult for policymakers to really process, I think, all the climate information that they get. What we see is that there is a lot of fragmentation. If you look at policymakers at national level, again, the example of Tunisia, we see that the climate focal point only resides within the Ministry of Agriculture. So there is no one working on climate within the other ones. No one in Ministry of Education, Infrastructure, Transport, Finance, and so on. And I think especially if you talk about climate services, Ministry of Education is key. There are many good examples, even in Bangladesh, where climate is really mainstream throughout, and it's in the curriculum of schools. So that's, I think, very important. Second, this is a point that I already made earlier, the importance of also for policymakers to give, if national policymakers, to give voice to the local level, be it civil society, be it cities, and so on. So that's this bottom-up approach that I talked about. I think that's the second point.
Thank you. Annalika, you just wanted to pop in again. Yes.
Just a quick one, because Hannah triggered my thinking. Yes, there's a lot of information. So another thing we can do, in addition of affordability, accessibility, is standardization. So if we help with the standardization, then we give the certainty to the consumer that these are the climate services that meet the standards and these are trustworthy, because right now there's a lot and people might not be able to tell.
And I think in the role of the consumer that Jaime first brought to the table, it is, you know, we talked about a question of trust in the users of the services, but there is a lot of green, you know, we are in a climate, I don't mean a climate, but in the broader sense, where we don't want to trust. And we have very good reasons in a lot of cases not to. So the consumer also needs help in order to continue to have that impact, to continue to have an impact on the policymaker. I just want to ask though, measurement policies, okay. Just while we do, I've got more questions coming in and we've got half an hour, but we've got a few more questions. What I wanted to just say, but again, maybe I'm wrong, is that from what I hear, obviously, with these climate services, they are complex because of the sectors, because within one sector, the geography, the needs, the size of a farm, the everything, what seasonal, what weather season, is it winter, is it spring? So sort of no shit Sherlock that it's complicated for a policymaker to know, you know, they need to push it overall, but it's tremendously complex to get a handle on if you are not the minister, and this needs to be mainstreamed across all of those different policy areas. Let me just crack on. Indeed, I mean, we've had this question, which is the best method or approach to measure and evaluate the impacts of policies? We've touched on this already on the indicator and the indices, and can policymakers do more? I don't want to go back to where we were, but does anybody need to add anything, Jaime, on this? Yeah, because you weren't part of that first conversation. Go on.
Thank you, Katrina. One thing you say touched my mind when we talk about climate services. No? So, for instance, in the olive sector, in the olive grown, we know, we have made studies how the olive trees, which are working as a Mediterranean forest in many of the regions, they are providing a climate service because they are storage the CO2. And the balance is positive. We made an international study on the balance, which is amazing. So for producing 1 liter of olive oil, you are storing 10 kilos of CO2, which is about 80 kilometers of emissions of a normal car. And then we wanted to transmit this information, but we cannot. We cannot put it in a label because of the legislation it's very difficult to put in value those services. The consumers, they don't know about it. And it's not easy. You cannot communicate that the simple thing that behind this bottle of olive oil, there is a climate service. And there is a lot of rigid system that doesn't allow you to transmit this climate service to the consumer that may be ready to pay for it or not, but at least give him the choice. Now, this is one of the bottlenecks that we see, that there is a rigid system to pass this information through the chain.
Okay, just on that point, Adriana, did you want to make another point, or I didn't?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to, because when you were mentioning, you know, how difficult and complex it is, it's even more beyond that, because you are not only thinking about, you know, minister of a particular department, but it has to be, you know, kind of many ministers. So even I just let me give you an example on, you know, kind of measuring the effects of the weather forecast, you know, on people in Southern Africa. When we're looking at what has, you know, whether or not, you know, the African producers were using the climate services and climate forecasts, we just seen a very big differences between, you know, actually, you know, the uptake of that information on them. And then we are kind of trying to understand, you know, why one farmer getting the weather forecast did adapt to the, you know, coming situation, and why the other didn't. And we found out that the reasons are usually, you know, in so much outside of agriculture or within, you know, kind of bigger agricultural markets. So some simply didn't have, despite all the information and the idea that, okay, I have to prepare, you know, they were not able to buy the right seeds, you know, that are drought tolerant in that case, you know, just because the markets were not there. or because the infrastructure was not there, or because other things were not there. So, you know, there's a lot, you know, it's very, very, very complex. And just kind of one sentence on, you know, what are the best methods? You know, we have methods as a kind of, you know, policymakers, you know, to really look at the effect of policies. There are ways to do all sorts of, prior to putting the policy in place, to design, you know, some experiments, which policy work and how people take up the policy, whether the policy will have the intended effect on those people or not. But those take time and it's usually costly. So there's a lot of, you know, things that are playing, you know, a role in whether or not particular policy will be well evaluated or not, you know, and upfront, whether this will be, you know, done prior to, you know, implementation or just, you know, exposed. So it's very complex.
Indeed. Let me hold that thought there. Let me let our audience know, because we're not going to break until lunch. So this session will close at 12:30. I'm also going to give an indication to the speakers, and I'm going to run hopefully an hour session of the last one, which I think we should manage. But we do still have a few more points to get through. So the technical team, you can go a little bit more back to a split screen with me and a speaker or a speaker on their own. Let me just ask Annelika, we've got a few more sort of itches to scratch in terms of the subject. Absolutely. Let me come back and hear from you what you think makes, I asked this question to Hannah, what you think makes a policy adaptable to that local scale, and also that sort of relationship between the local and the country level. And again, you know, making sure it is really robust to deal with some of these really complex contingency events. Don't speak too fast. Just a couple of minutes, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I think there is around at least two elements. And when Hannah was talking about this, about the policy, the governance is key. And this mixture of top down and bottom up, you need to the clear engagement bottom up, and also you need clear engagement in terms of the governance there of the ministries and the different actors. And we see it working on research and innovation, but on climate, that a lot of our interlocutors in the member states are from the ministries of research and innovation or agencies for research and innovation, and not necessarily from the climate field. And our action is limited when we only speak to those in the research and innovation, because the framework, the way they work, is focused on getting funding, on increasing research, increasing the science, but not onto getting into the policy. So lately, most recently, we're trying to get this approach of working with both, with the climate ministry, with the environment ministry, or the natural resources, depending on the member states, the different agencies and departments that do it, but bringing it together. And this is key, because otherwise we could be developing really cool climate services and nice data when it comes to on the side of research and innovation, but there's no uptake, there's no direct link with the climate policy, then it falls apart, because we can develop lots of really nice climate services, but if there's no direct feedback to policy and to the users, or maybe there's feedback to the users, so the farmers are using it but not coming to the policy, then it falls apart a bit, because you know the overall law regulation is not taking it. So we need that communication is key across all stakeholders, so not only the citizens, the consumers, but across national governments. And you mentioned this mainstreaming of climate, and it's absolutely necessary. This mainstreaming of climate and mainstreaming, from my field, mainstreaming of the latest science and innovation on climate as well. That's essential, especially because it's a relatively new field where there's lots of information coming every day. There's I mentioned uncertainty. We have more uncertain futures. And we increase the certainty in some, but then other uncertainties open up, and we need that connection. That is absolutely essential. And then on the fact of being robust to be able to tackle not only climate change disasters, but then military conflicts or any other kind of conflict of upset, I think there needs to be flexibility in this. There needs to be room for adding new knowledge, for having new contingencies. And resilience needs to be built into all of this. And climate, working climate adaptation, you know, resilience is in the top of my mind. And we see it with the conflict in Ukraine, that, you know, national production be depending more on the national product, it is key, because now we're seeing that we're highly dependent on energy, and these are all learnings from climate adaptation. You know, climate adaptation tells us that we need to be more resilient on the national production and not so resilient on trade for others. So the resilience needs to be built across all policies and not only climate policy. So I think this climate mainstreaming is absolutely needed.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. And absolutely, you said, you know, resilience needs to be built in, but it sounds like obviously flexibility needs to be built in, so one can be preemptive and proactive and not just reactive. Hannah, when you hear, you know, coming back to this word resilience, and looking at the different actors, we've talked a lot about policymakers, we've touched on the consumer, obviously the farmers themselves, the producers have been in the forefront at this event. Who has to play a role, even the primary role, in building resilient agri-food systems? And do you think there's somebody at the moment that you would say isn't playing that role?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question. So, as you know, I work on Europe-Africa relations. So I focus a lot on the work that the EU is doing in partner countries. And so perhaps I can answer this by looking at the role of the EU and what type of role the EU is playing in, like the work that I mentioned in Tunisia. Again, so to what extent are they helping to make the food system more resilient, more sustainable? And I think it's important also for Europe to assess its own work, like what it's doing in Tunisia and other North African countries, because from the perspective of transboundary climate impacts, if you would have instability in a country like Tunisia, which is an important geopolitical partner of Europe, this could then have, of course, also knock-on effects on Europe, be it through supply chains, migration, and so on. So it's also in the interest of Europe, and that's the point I want to make, to also support the sustainable food system in Tunisia. But then the question is it really playing this role? Is it doing that? And there I can see some incoherence between policies and actions. I think from a trade perspective, there are trade interests that promote, of course, olive production. But as I said earlier already, these are being produced in monoculture systems. And in some places in Tunisia have led already to ecological deserts. So at the same time, from environmental cooperation or cooperation around environmental issues are very much focusing on energy, which is of course also an important sector, and access to energy, the green transition. But at the same time, you have some development projects also looking at adaptation here and there, but it's not really high on the agenda. And if you look at the multi-annual indicative programs, so the programming for now it started last year, but for a 7-year period, they're not ready yet for North African countries, so waiting for them. But if we look at the ones from sub-Saharan Africa that are already published on the Commission's website, there is a strong push for incorporation, for blending, for inviting the private sector. We can expect, of course, something similar in North African countries. And I'm not saying this is necessarily bad, but often when you need to support farmers, the poorest farmers especially, is it then not better to give grants, grant-based climate finance? And that's a bit our concern, that with this, the EFSD Plus, is the name of this tool, a strong focus on private sector, would it not be to the detriment of the farmers that are already, as I said earlier, facing very difficult situation in a country like Tunisia? So I see that's my point is that there is, to a certain extent, some incoherence between interests of the EU.
Yeah. And it's not the first time I don't think that will be a big surprise to anybody. Let me just come back to Jaime, and then I'm going to come to you, Adriana. I mean, let's just stick with these roles, and perhaps, you know, because of your work with the EU, you might want to come back on what you hear there from Hannah, but also, you know, the importance of, you know, the dissemination and adoption, and thereby the adoption of climate services. Let's look at the actors in that. But also, that's a corollary, the first question is there anything you wanted to respond there when I was asking, you know, is there, what kinds of actors, and Hannah was saying, well, you know, absolutely the EU, but I see some incoherence there in policy.
Thank you, Katrina. Well, regarding the actors, I kind of agree with Angelica. No? There is a whole layer of actors, and what is essential is the communication and the sensibility. Why? Because we have top the political level. Okay, they're setting the agenda, they're setting the goals, the framework. Then is coming the whole regulatory system. In our case, EU level, states, local, following more or less this agenda. We have the farmers and the private sector, the industry following this agenda, but with an eye also to their business, they're making their profit, which is in this framework. No? But at the end, we have the consumers, and in the particular case of the climate services, it is especially sensible to have this balance that I was talking at the beginning. Why? Because if you lose this balance, if you are too much ahead in your ambition and you are lagging behind the people, the normal people behind, not the people in the cabinets with the long view, the day-by-day people, then the risk is that they will grow these negationist lines, populist that is growing all over the Europe. Negationist saying Europe is bad, climate change is not true. This is growing also if there is not a very, very sensitive feedback and clear communication with all these layers. And this is the big risk, particularly in the days we're living today. This is the big risk. Is this fine-tuning, in my opinion, is essential in the political policy making and the role of the actors. That's why I was saying that the consumers, which are also the voters, we have to keep them in mind, and we are observing that today. But we in the political discussion on agriculture, where we have on discussing the more ambitious climate change agricultural policy on earth, which is the common agricultural policy, there are already voices saying, "Hey, we are going to lose production capacity. Let's forget about all this thing. Let's look back. We need to find this balance, and we need this communication and fine tuning." And also regarding Hannah, which is very interesting, what she also was saying from the Tunisian experience, where we also have a lot of activity in the olive sector, which is actually playing a very interesting service to stop the growing of the desert with the olive trees. Is amazing to look at it. But she mentioned something about the incoherence, which is unavoidable. Incoherence is part of myself, of ourselves, and is part of the policy making process. We cannot think that and we have to deal with that, and we have to measure, and I don't say we need to accept. We have to grow to make it better, but to be aware and try to fix these gaps and try to be the more correct we can. But there's this tendency to say, okay, we should not be disappointed because there is some kind of incoherence, because and that was my other.
No, and I absolutely, and I know that, you know, we're going to be scratching the surface in a lot of this because we've got just 10 minutes. But good point. Do you think also, just so I know, God, no, I'm not going to say it because I'm going to piss you all off if I say one sentence or two sentences. It's far too difficult a demand. Just to kind of close off on this bit of policy making and incoherence. I mean, is it also complicated because, let's use that word, there are trade-offs for policymakers. There are decisions that engender trade-offs. Adriana, did you want to say something about that?
I mean, it's not if I can say, I mean, I just need to think how to say very few words on that, but I do agree with you. There's like the time that, the policymaker has just only one objective in mind, they're gone, that's now the poor policymaker, needs to think about, food security, well-being, economic aspect, trade aspect, this and this and this and this. And there's no way that, you know, all the goals can be, you know, enhanced, you know. Of course, everybody tries to think about, you know, how to do the synergies, you know, but building the synergies is not always easy, or sometimes not even possible. So there are plenty of trade-offs, you know, within the ministries, across the goals, across, you know, the beneficiaries. So that's very, very hard, actually. You know, sometimes we always, you know, like to put the blame on the policymaker, or the wrong policies or something. It's not easy, and there's an army of people, you know, in the EU, for instance, who try to optimize, you know, across many different targets and objectives and beneficiaries, but it's very, very difficult. So,
okay, no, that's good. I'm only cutting in. Now, I'm going to just say, I've seen and you have seen, there are two questions on standardization and on empowering rather than paternalizing farmers who are also part of the private sector. I'm going to leave those till the very end, because because one question is, what should we pay attention to? Which aspects of climate services for standardization? You can choose one. So I think this can be a concise answer. And the second is, how do we make sure we're not sort of paternalizing, patronizing, sort of we're not empowering, and also ownership and tools? I only need a sentence for each. I'm going to leave those because I still just want to come back on a couple of issues. Just briefly, I'm going to stay with you, Adriana. I don't know whether we did talk, Hannah did give some very good examples of the importance of how we make that policy, you know, adaptable to the local scale. She talked about well-functioning CSOs, success stories, the importance of finance and autonomy for local government. If we are again sticking with this, how can we ensure the policies really do have an impact? We haven't said, can we say a little bit more on whether context-driven policies can help do that? I don't know if we've just explored that enough, good people. Do you want to say, again, bear in mind, we do only have sort of 5-6 minutes, so keep it really nice and concise. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just let me highlight that I do really agree a lot with what was said before with, I think, Hannah and Erika, and also Jamie mentioned this, how important it is to give a flexibility, you know, to everybody, to all the actors, in order for them to pick the best way for them. And it's just about, you know, not patronizing, you know, paternalizing, you know, farmers or any other, you know, private agents. You know, from the policy making perspective, one needs to really kind of provide the right set of incentives rather than, you know, babysitting each and particular actor. This is really very important aspect. But coming back to the context, it's really very, very important. And for that, one needs to have a really very good information. But, you know, to contextualizing, you know, and policies, you know, it has to be done, but with the healthy degree of pragmatism, because we are all different, and there's impossible to give the, you know, to prescribe policies for each individual, you know, person for his or her, you know, particular standard. But one needs to be, you know, kind of pragmatic about that. So it's very important to understand, you know, again, what I just mentioned, you know, the goal, you know, which kind of, you know, within big, which kind of context we want to do, whether we want to do it in food security or environment, adaptation, climate. It's very important, you know, to understand. It's very important to understand the characteristic of beneficiary, whether, you know, the policies are targeting a risk-averse people, or whether they target, you know, women. They're targeting, you know, that's something which is super, super important. But I think the most important is to really understand what type of issues works when, and under which conditions, because not everybody reacts the same to the same impulses, and not every situation is the same. So one needs to be really careful with giving a lot of power to the producers and consumers and, you know, processors, in order to just adapt a bit, you know, so the goal is reached. But how they reach the goal, you know, that would be very good if optimally it's given to the people.
Thank you very much. Right, in the last closing minutes, up to you. I mean, I think this standardization question, you know, which aspects of climate services should we sort of prioritize? And, you know, do you think we're paternalizing farmers? We need to empower them better. Let me come to you, Annelika. I just want you to say, and I mean that, no more than a minute, please, because if we don't observe that, we're going to lose audience who are going to get so hungry, they're going to disappear without listening to our next speakers in the last session. So what is your last message, and hopefully in response to that?
Sure. So on standards, it's more about quality control and transparency on agreement on the methodology of getting the data, and transparency on the potential bias, on the conclusions, on the presentations on climate services. We don't want to narrow it too much. It's just more about transparency of communicating the underlying information. And on the farmers, this one is tough, but from policymakers, we make our best to empower them rather than patronize them. And I know that, patronize them, but I know sometimes we make the mistake of perhaps through the subsidies, through all this helps, we're paternalizing them. So perhaps we need to have a better approach to that. Perhaps what Hannah was saying of this more intergovernance and more inclusion on bottom-up conversations with farmers, and tough conversations on climate change is going to affect you, so we need to change. Things need to change, but you're bringing you to the table. Perhaps that's an approach.
Thank you very much, Hannah. You've just your name has just been mentioned, so let me come to you.
Yeah, analyzing them. So perhaps we need to have a better approach to that. Perhaps what Hannah was saying of this more and more inclusion.
I'm hearing a replay of your voice, Annelika. I was thinking, goodness me, she's very good at mimicking people's voices, Hannah. Anna, sorry, let me give you the floor. Go on.
Okay, I want to respond to the last question about empowering farmers. And I think, again, looking at developing countries, on the one hand, there is a lot of potential to empower them by leapfrogging, as it's called, because there is already so much knowledge and innovation, digital innovation and so on, that could be, even from Europe, could be brought to them so they can quickly make progress. And very practically, a way to also empower is, of course, by giving them, from a political point of view, attention, giving them access to seeds. That's crucial in developing countries, to lands, a lot of issues with land ownership, giving access to loans, also for women especially, giving access to credit. That's all. We know actually what the ingredients are to empower them, but it's so difficult to actually do it. And it has to do, again, there's a point I made at the beginning, it has to do with political priorities. It's about power, interests, it's about money, and they may not be the most interesting target, and we see that. So it's really a big issue. It's the reality. And but at the same time, they are the main producers of food. Food security is linked with conflict, as someone said earlier. So it should be really on the top priority of policy making.
Thank you very much. Jaime, let me come to you. Just a minute, please. And let me just say, there is a question that's come in about redirecting, repurposing environmentally harmful subsidies. Can climate services like those of MedGold play a role? I'm going to let you answer that on the platform, if I may, because if I keep opening things up, and I want to kind of keep things as coherent as possible. So Jaime, a last minute from you, please.
Okay, regarding the farmer's role and if we paternalize or empower, what farmer needs is a clear, fair play field to do their activity. They need to produce in an equal manner. We cannot put them to compete with products coming from third countries with different rules, which they can produce cheaper, and they have to provide certain services that are not paid and not by the market, not by the subsidies. This creates a lot of uncomfortable situation. They need a clear play field. So with some standards, everybody needs to respect, and those who don't respect those standards need to be penalized. So it's equal for everybody. It doesn't matter if it comes from producing in Europe or somewhere else. It has to be fair. it has to be stable. We cannot change all the day the rules and the things. They have to make their business with a view, and it has to be just business driving. They can respond to the signs of the market, and then if we have these consumers taking these options for the climate service, it will go. It will go. That is the way we think to do the policy making, how to address the of course with the regulatory framework. Incentive subsidies can help, but first of all, what they need is a fair play field.
Level playing field. So those for you are the ingredients for the best policy making cake. Thank you. All right, Adriana, please don't answer the other two questions. You said you could answer the one on redirecting. A lot of talk about redirecting and repurposing environmentally harmful subsidies. Can Med-Gold services? So can you just focus on that before I bring the session to a close, please? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We within the FAO, we did a lot of work on repurposing most harmful subsidies and actually support measures. Let's put it this way, because this is not beyond subsidies. And as Med-Gold and other type of research-oriented, projects are really very helpful with providing more evidence or where the most harmful effects of such a, let's say, unfortunate policy measures happen. However, the ball is with the governments, and unfortunately, most of the most harmful support measures are done based on a political rather than economic, prerequisite. So it's very hard because countries do not really want, many governments do not really want to withdraw certain subsidies, even if they don't make really economically sense, but they are often imposed due to, different political reasoning. So it's a very hard thing, but I think we all should be very hard, standing behind the fact that such a reforms has to take place, because it really, at the end, the long term doesn't really make any sense to support, support something that is going to kill us at the end, So thank you.
Thank you. That was an understatement to finish on. Yes, yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. We scratched the surface and a little bit more of so many issues. Critical, this level playing field, as you said, Jaime. This importance of being able to produce food, not depending on third countries, this, and also the disequilibrium when you rely an awful amount on imports, the knock-on effects that will have, on other countries if they were reliant on that production. We looked a little bit about resilience and the importance of robust governance for that resilience, really about the context-driven and the local level policy, which is absolutely critical. So we need that sort of top-down and that bottom up. We heard very importantly, I do go back to your comment, Adriana, and also on Elika on, this data. There is a lot of data. Sometimes we need to just look at what we have. We don't always need to rush for more. It is complicated because the contexts are so different, but we need to probably also simplify. You actually use the words dumbed down on Elika, what we have. And sometimes it's not easy, it's complex, it's fluffy to be able to really kind of adequately measure the impacts of policy and who at the end of the day is benefiting. But so much more. I'm sure you could have summed up better than I. Thank you. Don't forget, there might be people on the platform who want to engage with you. So if you do have the time, I would be grateful that you just pop in and have a check. And really, you can't hear any applause, but I hope people at home are clapping behind their screens. Thank you so much for sharing your, there you go, Carlo is, there we go. Thank you, Carlo, you're coming up next. Thank you to the four of you. You've been absolutely fabulous. And thank you for this very wide-ranging discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think we might have a little moment, a bumper to take us into our next session momentarily. I think we might have a little few seconds of a video. I could be wrong. So I'm going to use that really famous, slightly awful phrase, which is there's no rest for the wicked. So here we go, except my next speakers aren't wicked. They're all lovely, because we have to dive straight into our third and final plenary session, which I have shortened. So please forgive me to our lovely speakers, but I need to keep people with me and they need to have lunch. So we are going to explore the legacy, and we've had lots of interesting input on how we explore that legacy of MedGold, the European landscape and beyond. So we've had lots of things that have been set up for this. We'll look at the European landscape and the future prospects of the project, some of the specific challenges of climate change in the wine sector industry, the uptake of climate services in agriculture. There you can see from our slide on how Europe compares with the rest of the world in terms of climate services and opportunities for the Copernicus program. So we've got 4 lovely speakers with us. Perhaps they can be brought to screen with me, and then I can say a couple of words and then I can let them take the floor. So who do we have with us? You can wave regally. Chris Hewitt, Climate Europe coordinator. So Climate Europe, I think you all know, being the Europe-wide framework for Earth system modelling and climate service activities. But Chris is also head of the International Climate Services team at the Met Office and Professor of Climate Science at the University of Southern Queensland, among many other fabulous skills, including juggling and bread making. I just made those up, but you might be a good juggler and bread maker for all I know, Chris. Nicola Perrone, co-chair of the Horizon Europe Candidate Partnership of European Partnership for Agriculture of Data, which supports sustainable agriculture in the EU, plus policy monitoring and implementation by using digital and data technologies in environmental observation. And Nicola is also research director at the National Research Council in Italy. There we go. We have Carlo Buontempo, who is director of Copernicus Climate Change Service at the European Centre for Medium Range Weather Forecasts. And we have Paul Rocca, who is Director General of the International Organization of Vine and Wine. Now, I'm going to give each of you the opportunity first to clarify very briefly. I think 1 or 2 of you may use slides, others not. What your organization's involvement is, the link with MedGold, just so that we can establish that at the start. Then we can dive into questions, and of course still we can invite questions coming in on Swapcard that will arrive to us in our session. So why don't I start with you, Chris? Tell us about Climate Europe and its link with this wonderful project.
Certainly, thank you. I am quite good at making bread, I think, but not so good at juggling. And I feel Carlo gave the most regal wave there. It reminded me of the Queen of England. So well done, Carlo. Yes, so I'm not directly involved in MedGold, but I am heavily involved in climate services. So I've been working for the past 10 years or so around the world on some of the large international climate service activities, particularly the Global Framework for Climate Services, which involves numerous people around the world and led by some key UN agencies such as the World Meteorological Organization and other UN agencies and Met services, etc. But closer to home, I work on many European projects. I've coordinated lots of projects going back to the Ensembles project in Framework Programme 6, the Euphorius project in Framework Programme 7, which Carlo was part of and worked with me and some other participants at the workshop, Antonio Grata, for example. So I think quite a few MedGold participants were part of Euphorius. And then more recently, you've just mentioned Climate Europe. So I coordinated the Climate Europe project, which has just finished, sadly, but it very successfully over the last 5 or 6 years created a European climate science and climate service network. And we engaged that network through a variety of events, originally face-to-face events, and then under the COVID pandemic, we moved online, as clearly we are here. And we're contributing, Climate Europe is contributing to this MedGold event. And then the good news is there's, in terms of legacy, there's going to be a follow-on project called, rather creatively, Climate Europe 2, which I won't be coordinating. It's more difficult for UK organisations at the moment to coordinate projects, sadly. But that will be coordinated out of the Barcelona supercomputer. Some of those participants, I'm sure, are on this call. And that will continue the good work of Climate Europe. And in terms of MedGold and legacy, I think that's a good opportunity for some legacy for MedGold. And that will start later this year, Climate Europe 2. Is that a good enough introduction, Kat?
That's a fabulous introduction. Thank you very, very much. Nicola. Is that what look, they kept you on to ask you a question, but I'm going to move straight on. I don't think I pronounced your first name in a very good way, did I, Mr.
Yeah, you
Gilligan?
did.
Did I?
Yeah.
Go on.
Nicola, yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, Nicola, but I said Nicola. I said it, Nicola. Okay, so tell us, please, about this European Partnership for Agriculture of Data. Just give us a quick intro into how this all fits together with MedGold.
Yeah, that's right. The partnership on agricultural data is aimed to reinforce the use of Earth observation data. So we talk about Earth observation data from satellite, from in situ, from proximity sensors, all kinds of sensors, and to make sure that we develop tools, user-friendly tools that can allow farmers and all stakeholders to use to get benefit from availability of a large amount of Earth observation data. As we know, European Union has been investing a lot of money in space observation and in situ network. There are several also ESFRI infrastructure operating to observe the quality of our environment. So the overall scope is really to make sure that we are able to use, to capitalize the benefit of this huge amount of Earth observation data to make the sector, the farmers and the agricultural sector more competitive, more digital driven, using a lot of digital technology in order to make the agriculture in Europe more competitive on international market and more compliant with the environmental policy that goes from climate change to chemical pollution and to prevent the impact of the use of chemicals in the agriculture sector, so to lower the use of these chemicals in this sector, so to improve the quality of product. And so it's a partnership that is a bridge between Earth observation, environmental quality, and the need of agriculture sector.
Thank you very much. I love that. You gave very, very sort of robust description, and then you summed it up very nicely in the last sentence there. Thank you. You look like you're in a Hollywood film because of the shine on your glasses. You look like
I am in the hotel room. I am in the hotel room, and usually, I am in Pisa currently now. And in my hotel room, the light is terrible. It's like yellow.
You look like you look like don't mess with me. You're like, we cannot see
no.
I
can see you very well, and
no, we can't see your eyes.
I have a fancy glasses, green glasses that I use for reading, and so.
Thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Carlo, so you've been mentioned already by Chris. Tell us, give us a little bit of an introduction about, the Copernicus Climate Change Service and MedGold and what's that relationship.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And I'm glad that Chris recognized my royal wave. It was, I worked hard on it. Well, in essence, the Copernicus Climate Change Service actually addresses two of the elements that were raised in the previous session. So Jaime said it's important for the information on climate to be based on facts. And Annelika was talking about it's not just data. So in essence, the Climate Change Service is a way of transforming this wealth of data that exists, and it's typically in the petabyte, it's a huge amount of data, in the few kilobytes of information that are really relevant for the policymaker and for the citizen. So that's what we do in the Copernicus program, in essence. I was lucky enough to be actually part of the scientific advisory board of MedGold, and I really enjoyed the ride very much. So what the program provides is observation. We were hearing from Nicola a minute ago, the importance of Earth observation. So this is data about the past, data about the recent past from the reanalysis, but more importantly, the data about the near future, so the projection of the prediction for the next few months, and the climate projections for the end of the century. We use the concept mutated from the Global Climate Observing System the concept of essential climate variable. So you see here some of those variables and some of the variables we give access to. And the idea is to have a rather holistic approach to the climate, so that all the information about the climate, present, past, and future, can be obtained and then used in different sectors. So that's very much what we do. In terms of the program as a whole, I think of the last 5 years or so, we've been quite successful. So big contribution to the IPCC and to the science community, but also very large user base. So we have now 125,000 users and counting, and we deliver to them something in the order of 80 terabytes of data per day, responding to 500,000 requests of data per day.
Wow. First of all, the technical team who said, Katrina, please do not speak too fast at this event, because we have, not everybody is English native. Okay, who speaks fastest? It's not me, is it? There we go, just saying. No, but super, when you say, just for me, when you said, we've got all of this data coming in and you have got to transform it into information that's useful, you just said a few kilobytes. So that's quite a filtering, is it not? I mean,
well, yes. So if you look, and I can slow down to use better my time. If you look at our most popular data set, which is this reconstruction of the past weather of the globe at high resolution, that's typically in the order of 10 petabytes. So it's a massive amount of data. And if you have, you'll field your farm, typically this is in the tens of kilometers spatial scale. And for it, even a time series of 50 years probably is in really megabyte at most. So extracting the information is at times a matter of reducing the spatial scale of that information, reducing the variable we give access to. So we have hundreds of variables, and maybe that farmer or that policymaker is only interested in temperature or precipitation. So there is that filtering that needs to happen in a traceable way.
Absolutely. Hence, I mean, not in connection with this, but hence Adriana saying in the last session, it's more than complex. We need to have a new word. We can't even say uber complex. We need to invent an entirely different word to really articulate and capture the complexity. Pau, over to you. I think you might have a couple of slides also to share. Is that correct? And you need to unmute yourself as well so that we can hear you.
Yes. Thank you. So we can use the to describe my organization.
Indeed, just to reinforce
I think you
that
have,
link.
Okay, so you're projecting this. So the next slide explains what the International Organization of Wine and Vine. You had, in the previous session, you had Jaime Lillo from the International Olive Oil Council. That this is similar. The only thing that it's an older organization. Ours was founded in 1924, and so it's not under the United Nations umbrella, okay, because it was before. The objective is to inform, assist, harmonize, and standardize, and support the viticultural sector. So we make standards. Publications, dissemination of information. We have 48 members. Those members represent at this moment 86% of global production and 71% of the consumption of wine in the world. It's a heavily internationalized commodity, say it's 5 out of 10 bottles cross a boundary. We have a network of 1,000 experts, more or less, and it's an organization based on scientific and technical support. The nature of our decisions is always scientific and technical, or the standards have to be supported by science. So final decisions are always made by consensus of all the members. So the next slide, we can say how the viticultural sector is. It's a very fragmented system. It's atomized. We have many thousands of viticultures, producers, and also the As you see, you have many brands and many. Why is that? Because all this standardization provides for an economy that it's based on the origin. So what the product is at the end, it's something that comes from a very particular origin. The consumer demands the identification of origin. So that empowers a lot the producer. So that makes it very, very fragmented, which is good in terms of adaptation and diversity. Biodiversity, economic biodiversity, it's interesting. The sector is confronted to all the challenges that all sectors are, but mainly climate change. And so we have to develop innovative practices and tools to support the sector. And there comes the opportunity of MedGold, no? And this is the next slide, in which we find it a very useful decision support tool. The dashboard, it's very practical. I have to say it's, for example, today, this weekend in France is going to be a frost on the weekend and on Monday. So there needs to be taken decisions at this moment. So this is something practical, okay? So we are collaborating with, Carlo is here, Carlo Bontempo, he knows about. And so we are budgeting and everything to collaborate with the MedGold. We need long-term predictions for main climatic factors, but also we have to offer easily and accessible value information to manage risk within the framework.
Can I come to some of those things in the discussion?
Sure.
Because I don't want to leap into that quite yet. I just wanted to sort of see the link, and then we can look at more of the challenges and what.
Okay, so this is more or less you have the message. So we are very interested in the application.
Absolutely. You said it is the dashboard is a very useful decision support tool, not least because there is a frost. I love the way you said not just this weekend, but also Monday, Katrina. Right. Now, gentlemen, we have about 35 minutes. That means, please, it is brain box bingo. I know we could all talk for hours, and I have huge respect for that, and I mean that. But let's package it up because we must keep our audience with us who are getting hungry, okay? So we're really top line answers to some beautiful audience takeaways. Chris, back to you, please. What three main learnings can you share with us from observing the uptake and the adoption of climate services in European agriculture?
Okay, so firstly, it can be really difficult to develop climate services that are of value to decision makers. Not always, sometimes it's easy, but it often is very difficult to develop the services that are actually going to be of value to the decision makers. It's even harder to have the decision makers then adopt those and act on those services. So I think that's one of the main learnings there. And building on that, the underpinning capability we have, it often falls short of what the decision makers need. I mean, perhaps it always falls short. Carlo's already raised an issue, for example, around the spatial scale the decision makers need the information. So there's a big challenge there in trying to have capability and the services that can meet the decision makers' needs and add value. And identifying who those people are can be very difficult. And then bringing all of that learning back to scientific research and development to improve the underpinning capability in the services. But to be positive, we're making great progress on this, such as in MedGold and other projects, even the Euporius project going back many years. So many people know that. So that's one. Did you want to interrupt me, Kat, or should I go for the other two?
No, go for the other two, please.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Second one, so building on that, I think it's really important to engage across the entire landscape, the climate service value chain or value web or whatever people want to think about. So there's a landscape of actors involved in the climate service landscape. Some people like to call it a value chain, but whatever. So engaging across that entire chain is essential. It's not just individual parts of that landscape, but trying to engage across all parts of that landscape is essential and very valuable. second one. So the third one, challenge around that though, is that engaging is very time consuming, depending on what the level of engagement is. So the way that we engage across that landscape, it needs a lot of thought and probably tailoring to specific cases. And so the other panelists will probably have some good examples here. Actually, coincidentally, I'm currently working on some guidelines for general user engagement with the World Meteorological Organization under another large European program, CLIMSA program. So it is a big challenge, this user engagement. It's something we are getting better at, but it is time consuming and needs more thought. So that's three fairly quick answers, if that's okay, Kat.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. And I don't know if you caught anything earlier, but there was a huge, what did come up in terms of kind of facilitating and promoting adoption was not just raising awareness, but actually getting out there, both governments getting out there to users, literally host a barbecue, host a pizza evening for the winemakers. There was the getting out there, there was training up people to get out there, there was ensuring there's training in the use of their tool, the financial aspects of using all of these tools. There was a lot, you know, of overlapping, which I guess resonated. Just for me, you know, who isn't in this area, when you say, Kat, it's very hard to develop valuable, you know, services of value, not least get them adopted. What would be, give me an example, what would not be valuable for a policy maker? What's a not valuable information in this area? Or is that impossible for you to answer? Is that too?
No, it's not impossible. So okay. I've worked at the UK Met Office for a long time, and when I joined the UK Met Office, we were very much in the mode of, we have lots of very clever people, don't we? They've got PhDs and lots of experience and scientists, and we would be pushing out climate information because we were the clever people, and so the policymakers would receive whatever information we thought was useful. And the world has moved on. It's much more interactive and engaging now, but there probably are still examples out there where people just push out information on the assumption that the policymaker needs that information. So, I mean, yeah, it's impossible to answer. There are hundreds of examples. It might be something simple like a global average trend of surface temperature. It's useful to some people, but the specific policymaker you might have in mind might need more detail. So there are a range of examples you could think of. But no, that's definitely the case.
Do policymakers in general know that they can get this more context-specific information? Because I remember when I worked with Carlo last year on Copernicus's event, there was that point made that, you know, what we think is simple information getting to policymakers actually probably isn't as accessible and simple and context-driven as it should be. So do policymakers, for example, or users even know they can get it?
Sometimes not. No, you're right. So there'll be lots of examples where they don't know, no. And perhaps they define their policies based on what they read in the newspapers and things. So there is a sort of an obligation from the developers and providers of services to get out there and advertise what it is that they can do, what they could do, and also learn what would be more useful to do, building on your first question. So not a case of pushing it out there, but yes, there is some form of obligation to get out there and engage with the policymakers and the decision makers. Otherwise, who knows where their information is coming from, because they're going to be very busy people. If they see the information they want, they will just go to it. So yeah.
I mean, Chris, I hope it's not coming from either the Telegraph, the Sun, or the Daily Mail, but, you know, given what you've just said, who the hell knows? That would be alarming. Okay, if we can come to Nicola, please, with the very nice reading glasses. Sort of a shame you haven't changed your glasses. You could have a variety of glasses. So you did talk about, you know, the agriculture, this partnership on the agriculture of data, reinforcing the use of observatory sensors and satellite data. So let's just presume as a starting point for my question that there is a case for data-driven agriculture in tackling the climate challenge. How would you reinforce that case? Why is there such a strong case for data-driven agriculture in tackling the climate challenge?
Yeah, the challenge is to reinforce the linkages between the decision and policy-making process and science. So usually we have a lot of data, a lot of knowledge, and how to transfer the knowledge to the decision-making process. It's a big challenge in every European effort, European project. And up to now, what we have seen, not only in the agricultural sector, but also in other sectors, that there is not very much capacity or at least we have to invest a lot in order to make sure that the knowledge that we have gained in the Earth observation community can be an advantage for the agricultural sector. So the scope of this partnership is really to elaborate, to develop downstream services, for example, that are easy to use to allow farmers, small farmers, you know, the average size of a farm in Europe is looks like to be like five hectares per capita. So we are talking about small farms. We don't have the big farms that you can have in the US or any other places. So usually Europe are all small farms on average. So you have to allow farmers that are not PhD, are not scientists, they are farmers. So well-educated farmers for sure, but still, you know, you need to make sure that the tools, user-friendly or data-driven tools that you make available are easy to access, to use, and in order that the farmers can get benefit from the availability of this huge amount of information that are Earth observation, as I said, data, so not only satellite, but you have in situ a lot of proximity data. For example, now all the machinery used in agriculture, they produce also a lot of data, georeferenced data that can be used to optimize the processes in agriculture and make the agriculture more efficient and more competitive. So really there is a need to ensure in a European Union that the big investment in space observation, for example, you know, a European Union is investing a lot in new constellation of satellite and Copernicus program and so forth, so that this becomes a real benefit for end users, stakeholders, so the everyday life of farmers. So we have to make sure that this chain, the value chain of data, from data to knowledge and to decision making, to management capacity of the farmers is a reality. And then another important aspect for this partnership is also to support member state and the European Commission in having more efficient tools in the CAP, in the community agricultural policy implementation. And so all the subsidies that the European Union provided to farmers to make sure that this is more efficient system. So which is not easy, but we have to ensure that the availability of Earth observation data can be really a big benefit.
Thank you. And I think
farmers and the policy and decision maker.
And I think it's important what you said, you know, that the costs of this in terms of Earth observation, it's very important that the end user, the consumer, the citizen, the farmers itself, that there is an understanding, you know, of exactly what the added value is of that. And that's critical also. Right, let me come to Carlo, if I may. And all of this, whenever we talk about any kind of initiative or project, it's all about finding synergies, where do things fit together, not reinventing the wheel, relationships between different policies, between different initiatives. So let's look at how we can fit the MedGold results into the wider picture of C3S offerings. You know, what could farmers expect in case they're confused?
Yes. Well, I think that, you know, if we look back at MedGold, I think MedGold has been really an excellent project and a great success. And I think the success of the project is to a large extent due to the team of people who made the team MedGold. But to a lower extent, that's also been due to the fact that the data and the tools underpinning MedGold were available. So that wasn't the case 10 years ago. So there's been a large investment, a public investment, in freeing up the data and operationalizing their access. And Copernicus certainly played a role in that equation. So last summer, we signed the new contract with the Commission, which will guarantee our activities until 2028. So we have a long future in front of us. So the first thing that, you know, farmers and practitioners on the ground can expect is the level of support that MedGold has enjoyed over the last few years will continue. It means that the seasonal predictions that are important in underpinning some of the tools, some of the dashboard that MedGold generated will be there free to use for anyone. So it will be the climate projection, the reanalysis, and the observation. One other element worth highlighting in terms of what the farmer will find there is that we decided to maintain just few foci in the next phase in terms of sectoral application. And one of those will be on agriculture. So there will be an agricultural relevant sector. It's an application that is there to show how things can be done more than an exploitation tool for the downstream sector. So we do expect that a lot of the exploitation will happen downstream of us. It's not C3S doing all the work. On the contrary, we do expect more of this MED goals, more organization, small and medium enterprises, large consultancy, picking up from the data we make available and generated value-added tool. So one of the elements I want to highlight, and I close here in this answer, is really the work we are doing with Pau, Roca, and OIV, because one of the outputs of MedGold was this dashboard for the wine sector. In order for this to continue, then we need to ensure that the data that powers up that interface is still there. So we are working closely with OIV to ensure a future for that dashboard.
Thank you very much. And that's a nice, helpful mention, because I'm going to come to you next. Pau, you touched there in introduction, and we actually heard also yesterday and previously, even today, on the challenges of climate change for the global business of wine. Perhaps you can just harness a couple of those. So if I didn't get you the chance to entirely expand on that. You are a standards making organization, you talked about that, but it would be good also to just touch upon the normative and the regulatory issues in that sector, which are absolutely requiring reliable climate information.
Yes, thank you, Katrina. But if I may, I want to comment something on Chris' statement, yeah. and also it's right that you're right saying that it's so difficult to make this transition to the reality, onto the application. But I think the wine sector, it's privileged in a way that we have so many institutional levels because of the atomization of the sector. We have so many policy makers at different scales, Consejo Reguladoras, Consorti, all these, that they do help a lot. It seems a very inefficient system in terms of market, but when coming to this type of exercise, they are very good at institutionalizing the value chain. So I don't know if I'm responding to that. And then also,
oh, go on, sorry.
Carlo, you're right. The access to data, it has been very important. I mean, making data accessible, and this is something that we have for the future. There is a big discussion, and I hope to join Nicola on that at certain moment. And I'm going, because we do need to define also data protection, data ownership on many things. So sorry that I went back and
no, don't be sorry, because actually you preempted, because I was, before we went into a second and last round, and you
okay, so that's something on standardization as well, you know.
But
who owns the data, who protects the data, indeed. Where it's a provider of a service to the farmer, the one that owns the data. I mean, ownership of data, it's something relevant or not. I mean, those things are very, very important at this stage, because they can change the equilibrium, the economic equilibrium of the value chain. But
absolutely.
That's another, that might be another different discussion.
Hang on, Pau, 1 second. I just want to, before you come back to answering the two, and just be clear on the answers. Chris, did you want to sort of come back on that or come in there?
No, I'm not an expert in the wine sector. I drink wine, so I'm the end user, I guess.
Good.
In terms of
that makes you an expert, Chris.
It makes me an expert, but on the I guess the value chain aspect I was talking about. So it's really good to hear from Pau that the sort of the more decision maker, policy maker end of that chain or landscape, there are some different parts, and it sounds like the wine sector has a pretty good setup compared to maybe some other sectors. That's what I was hearing.
Okay, Thank you. So just, Pao, just in the interest of being concise and using our time well, just a couple of the other challenges you didn't touch on of climate change for this sector, but also I think you wanted to say a word on these normative and regulatory issues that do require reliable climate information. So let me give you.
Well, you know, I think everything has been said on regulation in the previous table as well, in the previous accuracy, using this as a performance indicators also of the environment transition. Water management is so important, and water regulation is very important, and we need to use also all this data. The correct compilation of sharing all these at different scales. How do we scale the use of that, because there are some things that need to be at a certain level. It's a boring discussion talking about standards. It's very boring, but it's very necessary. Okay?
It's so necessary. Yeah.
Just take one example. We need, everything is regulated in the sector. So fixing the date of crop, le jour de la vendange,
right.
All this sometimes it's a collective decision. Okay, yeah. It's something. The yields, managing the yields, because everything is regulated in order to manage quality, also to manage the market. Because when you manage yields, but all this has to do with anticipation of the what's going to happen. And also more long term, like what, because the vine sector, the vineyards are very in a way adaptable to climate change. We have many opportunities. We see now south of England producing very good sparkling wines. We're going to have some maybe in Norway and in Sweden. Okay, but that's because the plant is so adaptable, because we have so many varieties. We have so many clones. We have a polyclonal system in which many decisions need to be made. What I'm planting here, what's the rootstock, not only the variety, but also the rootstock.
Okay.
All this adaptation needs to be well informed before. We have been doing that for thousands of years. And now, just by this, and now we have all this data, we can be much better, much more performant.
Yeah.
So this is the type of link that we need to do with MedGold, because I think it's a big opportunity. We have everything, we have all the system of decisions, but there is a piece of information here coming in and an input that can multiply the performance of the sector.
And also just right, and what you say there also about long term, we heard yesterday specifically when we were focusing in on this sector, that the landscape is also evolving hugely. There is huge demands on the landscape from so many different areas, not least for the sector in which you are. So that in itself, the importance of being able to see how the landscape is being, I hate that word, carved up, but how it's being evolved, how it's being crafted is absolutely critical. I'm going to stop you there because I need to ensure that I have the time to finish when I said I would finish. I do want to come back to Chris, because I said at the outset of this that we were going to do this comparison. It's always good to have a look at how Europe sits in the business of climate services with the rest of the world. You are the man who can give a few insights on that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, thank you. My terminology is now looking problematic. I'm trying to avoid you describing a value chain, and I use the word landscape, and now Power has a different interpretation of landscape. This whole arena or production line of climate services, I think in Europe we're really strong across that, whatever we can call it, landscape, value chain, production line. So there's the data, the information, the predictions, the knowledge on climate observations, climate variability, climate change. We're really strong on that, no doubt. The European Commission have invested heavily in member states and others, so we're strong on that. And then taking that data and information and knowledge, making it available and accessible, such as through the Copernicus Climate Change Service, as Carlo has said, we're really strong at that in Europe. Bringing that data out to make it more actionable at relevant geographic scales, might be through some downscaling techniques or tailoring the information or looking at impact studies. We're strong on that. Bringing in sectoral knowledge, such as this workshop here. So There's lots of sectors we're very strong in Europe, and co-developing and delivering actual climate services to decision makers. There's a growing base of users of those services. So in terms of the business of climate services, we're very strong in Europe. And I mean, perhaps I go as bold as to say we're world leading, I would argue, maybe not in individual parts of that value chain, but across the whole spectrum. Europe is certainly up there in terms of world leading, but it's not something that we can really do in isolation from the rest of the world. The climate challenge is a global problem, depending on if you want to talk about mitigation or adaptation or climate variability. There's teleconnections. So collaboration is essential, and it's not really a case of trying to compete with the rest of the world. But if we can be world leading and then engage and collaborate with the rest of the world and with ourselves, such as Climate Europe's activities, I think that's very powerful. And we've got a huge amount of knowledge and experience, which we could and should be making available and used around the world, not just within Europe. So I would argue in many ways we're world leading, Katrina. There are aspects that we perhaps aren't, but we collaborate very effectively amongst ourselves and outside of Europe. So I think it's very good, the business of climate services in Europe. There's a positive message.
It was positive, and it's nice to hear that, because very often when I ask for comparisons in different sectors, you do have a bit of a Europe bashing to start with, and EU bashing, particularly because things take longer, maybe there's not so much flexibility, all sorts of other things. Oh, we're not so innovative, and you hear that in so many areas. Yes, you want to come in, but just to say, I would say when you use the word collaboration, I think it's a moral imperative in this particular area. It's a freaking moral imperative for me. But sorry, you wanted to come in there, did you?
Yeah, I was being broad and generic in my answer. So there may be individual people at this workshop who would say, no, we're not at all competitive. But I think across the whole piece, I think we're very competitive and world leading. And there will be areas where we're not. And then, yeah, collaboration, engagement, moral imperative, or whatever it might be, just common sense. I think that's key for us.
Thank you very much. Okay, again, I'm going to come directly on, and there is a question that might be a nice one to finish on with a sentence from each of you, because I would have asked you something similar, which is don't answer it now. It's for the very end. How do you see, imagine, describe the European landscape of data-driven climate services and agriculture in the next 5 to 10 years? You can describe it, or you can describe it as an animal or an object, because that's actually sometimes easier. Look at Carlo raising his eyebrows going, no, I'm not going to. Oh, okay, Carlo, right. No, not at all, Carlo. Nicola, coming back to you, still disappointed I haven't seen another pair of glasses. I mean, this is more of a sort of I mean, I talked about normative issues and I raised this question with Pau, but which elements do you think of MedGold contribute to normative issues in data-driven agriculture?
Well, I think I was not a partner of MedGold, so I don't know much about the project. I have been reading Major Outcome, and I think I agree that has been a terrific project, a very successful project. But one of the issues that have been mentioned by Pau Roca about the data and accessibility of data privacy, data, standardization. These are the issues that we are discussing in the candidate partnership on agriculture of data. These are common issues in every partnership, in every European project, because we talk about open data, open access, but very often people don't understand what is behind these nice words, and because data have a lot of economic value, and there are the value chain in the data technology is the big challenge in the future. The gross national product, the data may represent from 5 to 10% of the gross national product if you are able to use the data in the smart way. So there is a lot of discussion on this, and also in a European Union is working hard to establish rules and on the privacy, on who should use the data, how to keep open data accessibility, and so forth. So so the way I see it is that in the next in Horizon Europe, we have the next 6 years to go. I hope that the European Union also in the agricultural sector, thanks to the contribution of projects like MedGold and other projects, can really push forward the discussion and also the decision making in this sector. So if we want to create added value at the downstream of the data chain, we have to fix the rules, because otherwise we will keep talking, and then when you are looking for data for your knowledge hub or virtual lab that use a bunch of information for doing also economic evaluation of different farming strategy. You know, you have been talking about wine, there are olive oil production in the Mediterranean region that is on the same, you know, depends very much on the future of climate. So is very sensitive to climate change. And compared to the wine industry, olive oil is more in dangerous situation, because the adaptation is not that straightforward, for example. So it's really a big challenge is to make sure that we have a real access to the data. So all the issues, legal issues around the data accessibility will be solved hopefully soon, and also to establish standards, because if you don't have a standard, you cannot compare pears and apples. So you need to make sure that the metric behind the data it's correct, so we can compare data in a more scientific way and a more reliable way. So really, the partnership on agricultural data is aiming to contribute, and as you know, the partnership is a contribution from different projects. So MedGold and many other projects also have been developed in Europe and are ongoing now. So they are all clustering together to contribute to the achievement of these huge goals that are very huge.
And you're right. Carlo, did you want to say something, or you were just exercising your right hand?
No, I was sort of tentatively keen to intervene on this point. Just to say very quickly, won't take too much time. Just to say to Nicola that if there is anything we can offer from Copernicus on the data governance, which I agree is fundamental, then we will be happy to do it. So maybe offline we can show you what we have done, and if there is anything you can use, please do.
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you, Carlo. I think now we are going just another piece of information for all the audience, that we are in the process of developing the strategic research and innovation agenda of agricultural data partnership. So we are starting now during these days, and so this will keep us busy for the next couple of months. And certainly contribution from Copernicus world is very important. So you are among our also stakeholder in somehow, and so we will promote an open meeting for stakeholders, I think in a month or so. So I will keep your name in the list and make sure that we can use your knowledge and your position there, just to make sure that we get all the feedback from ECMWF and all Copernicus and
Good. So you don't need to have a private meeting afterwards, Carlo. You can have that meeting. And thank you. And we could, you are absolutely right. When Pau brought this up, Chris, I'm sure would agree, we can talk entirely separately for an entire weekend and a Monday when it's frosty in France. We can talk about this data issue, absolutely. And the point you raised there, Nicola, about, you know, value. And when I moderate on many occasions for DG Agri and talk about this issue, that certain farmers say, well, hang on a minute, I'm not sure I really want to give my data, because, hey, you know, who am I giving it to? Are they going to have a competitive advantage? In what context? So it is a very, very important issue. And to use the words sort of related to something else that Jaime was saying at the end of the last session, there does need to be this level playing field, and that really needs looking at and watertight. So 2 more questions, one for Carlo, one for Pau, and then that last question that I'm asking you that came in there to answer when I close. So Carlo, we talked a lot about co-production, co-design yesterday. That was a lot of in the meat of the conversation for climate services. So do you see, I think that, you know, it's an obvious question, that this is a 2-directional opportunity for Copernicus?
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, I can only answer positively. Is indeed very much the case that Copernicus is a user-driven program, and this by design. So we report quarterly to an entity called the Copernicus User Forum, where they are representative for the different member states, and they represent the interests of their own user at the country level. So one of the next tasks for me today is to respond to the question coming from Germany, from Poland, from the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. So we do have that contact, but we also actually put an extra effort in these new phases that has just started on user engagement. This means having more opportunity for training, more opportunity for national uptake, for application development, for outreach, and so on. Because it's not just us reaching out, and I link back to what was said before in relation to the policymaker not being aware of what is available. So there is that element where we reach out to say, well, look at that, we have this new tool. But it's very much about the feedback loop. And this is also recognized now at the global level, going back to what Chris was saying, in the new framework of the GFCS, the Global Framework for Climate Services. What is really emphasized is the arrow back, from the user back to the producer of climate information, understanding what is needed on the ground. So projects such as MedGold are really gold. Sorry for the...
Thank you for that.
Right, sorry, but
we love it. We like it.
But it's true, because through MedGold, I had the opportunity myself and the entire community, in a sense, to understand firsthand what were the need and the limiting factors of real user in the different sectors. So this is really valuable. And we don't need to do it anecdotally, just on one-off. We need to have a mechanism to operationally collect user requirement and map those into elements that can be actionable for the provider. So we try to do that, but certainly there is space for improvement.
And thank you for picking up, because we did hear from Nuno earlier today from the NBI. He used the words symbiotic blending relationship and interactive, and the feedback loop being absolutely critical in this. It's not just the listening, it's not just that you've got to hear the feedback, and also giving time for that feedback. We did hear that that's also very, very critical, is that those farmers have time, you know, when you use a tool or these services. So last one for you, Pau, it has to be quick, and then perhaps we can finish on an answer to, I'd like you to describe it as an animal and why. I think you need to use your brains in that capacity, gentlemen. I think you wanted to just say a word, Pau, and keep it lovely and concise. How you can, you are a fan, you speak so passionately about MedGold. Anything else in really being useful in the dissemination and the application and the uptake of MedGold that you think? We've heard so many things, ingredients that need to be there. What would you say?
Okay, this is the OIV. How can we make it bigger? I mean, MedGold, it's a European project, but just think that the southern hemisphere of the globe is producing at this moment 25% of the wine production and also the northern hemisphere is very big. It's not just Europe. I mean, we have many other countries. It's also, the land is mainly in the northern hemisphere. That's why we have 75%. So the thing is to take MedGold to make it a global thing. So it's global because Copernicus, I mean, it looks at all this data, but it's very important that those services are also provided for all our membership, which is the globe, and including all the producing countries. So that's the aim at this moment for OIV, and to tune a little bit the dashboard in order to, it's not a little bit, because it's a lot of data coming, and maybe the computer capacity, it's not enough, but I don't think it's a matter of computer capacity. I think we have been going through that.
Okay. Thank you very much. Chris, so can you do that? Can you tell me how you imagine, what do you see, how do you describe the European landscape of data-driven climate services and agriculture in the next 5 to 10 years? Would you describe it? Could you describe it as an animal? And if so,
no, I'm going to a food item. So I'm going to describe it as a scone.
A scone, a scone or a scone, Chris. We're not going there.
Exactly.
Okay,
you are proving my point nicely. So Katrina and I talked about this before.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
You wanted me to say also an animal?
Yeah, in a minute though, or a food. Hang on a minute. Listen to Chris. Yeah, oh yeah. You have to get your brain.
Okay, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
Chris, so Chris is talking about this lovely thing that we eat in Devon with jam and cream, either jam first or cream first. That's a whole other discussion. Chris, go for it.
No, that's exactly the point. So people have different needs and different approaches and solutions, Katrina. So you and I have a very different approach. So I think the European landscape of data-driven climate services in agriculture will depend very much on what people actually need. Well, I hope it will very much depend on what people need, building on what all of the other panelists have said here. So we should be driving this data and the developments in the data based on what it is that people actually want or need. So we can then improve our, whatever it might be, climate predictions, decadal forecasting, data, all those sort of things. And if I was to be selfish, it's so that, for example, I can then drink nice wine at an affordable price or have a good cream tea into the future. So if we can use this information more effectively, hopefully it will keep our wine and wheat or whatever going and at an affordable price. So it's a slightly flippant answer with a slightly more serious message.
Very nice. And also, of course, I was going to be, because, well, people digest information differently. So I was just going to jump on your scone/cream jam first. Who knows? We'll leave that for off stage. Thank you very much. Yes, and again, underlining that uber complexity, but that absolute need to look at the local concept, the specific context, all of those particularities. Precipitation, it ain't important for different kinds of sectors at the same time, and all of those different issues we've heard. Nicola, do you have an idea?
Well, I was thinking about this, but I don't know. It's certainly the situation in Europe on data technology and data business. All the business around the data is right now. The private sector, the commercial sector, will play a big role in the future, hopefully, in Europe, because, as you know, in Europe we don't have a big company like Google, Amazon, and so forth, and all these big companies are trying to put their hands on this data, huge amount of data we have in Europe. And I'm part of the group on Earth observation that one of the aim is really to make sure that all the data are made available to the end users. And there is this, Europe is so little, and in terms of a commercial sector. And so it's not very strong compared to the big company that you can have in North America, and also China is coming up very quickly. And so we need to reinforce. So it's like to have a game between different actors that have not the same size. So it's, I don't know which type of animal we can come up with, but currently, let's say that Europe is not very strong in terms of imposing to the global market, certain strategy, because we don't have a big player in the private sector in Europe.
I don't know. You probably have to have some kind of animated creature that you would
invent, Nicola,
from a Pixar cartoon. I think you might need to actually create one. Pao, had you thought? You were getting very excited there. Have you actually delivered?
No.
What?
No, it's
very briefly. What? How do you?
Well, I have no answer, so I pass on the next.
So.
I have no answer because I am a biologist, and I think it cannot be a extinct species. That's for sure. It cannot be Diplodocus, Tyrannosaurus, or anything. And I think big companies are going into that model. Okay, so it needs to be either insects or smaller, like mammals.
Okay, you need
so
to
this is my way of seeing it.
Okay, if Luigi was on with us, he could probably specify an insect. He's an insect specialist. It really made me happy to hear that. Carlo, last word to you, please. What would you say? How would you describe?
Well, in a sense, the animal that came to my mind is probably not a good animal for a spot, because I was thinking of an earthworm. And the reason why I was thinking of an earthworm is because it's a symbol for me that an entire trophic chain is actually working. An ecosystem in the soil is actually active and working. So what I do see as an important element in the future is this, from the climate point of view, it is climate becoming mainstreaming of climate services. And this needs to permeate the entire ecosystem. So small players, big players interacting with one another in an harmonic way. But given that the earthworm probably is not as nice an animal to close on, I thought that maybe a robin that feeds on the earthworm may be a better one.
That's nice. That's a lovely thought. So we don't have the earthworm, but we'll think about the robin actually ingesting the earthworm. Okay, I love it. But you know what I love about earthworms? It is so fantastic when I work in my garden and I turn over the soil to aerate it and I see the worms there. I actually love all that. They are so thank you very much for that image. And that, good people, has to be a wrap, because I think you included most likely need to eat. You've been so delightful. You've been fabulous. And thank you for letting me be, as I always say, a little bit Hurricane Katrina. But it's been so great to have all of that passion and all of your braininess in this last session. So I can give you leave to take a break off screen. Nicola, Carlo, you need to stay in touch. Maybe you can pop on to Swapcard and see if anybody has questions for you, but you've all been absolutely lovely. Warm thanks, of course, to all our wonderful speakers who've lit up our screens both today and yesterday. I think you cannot possibly not agree with me when I say that they've just been smart, funny, concise, really reactive, really warm, really personable. So I hope this has been a really good virtual event experience for everybody. Big thanks to the MedGold team for pulling all of this content together, for gathering all the speakers who are always very busy for this event. Huge thanks to the technical team. We've got Adria Congrex and Oiko Live. They have really worked hard. I know it looks very easy, but God knows, to make it look easy, a hell of a lot of work goes into it. So a big shout out to Vincent, to Marina, to Raffaella. You know that I love you, so there we go. And thanks to you, our fabulous audience, for being with us over the last 2 days. Don't forget, after lunch, so at 2:15 there is one round table of 45 minutes. That's the kind of focus on the business plan of MedGold and the exploitation of it. So you can be a part of that. You can even bring a sandwich, of course, because no one will mind. So that's at 2:15. Don't forget, download the speaker presentations. Don't forget, the event will be recorded and uploaded as on-demand content available on the platform itself until the 15th of April. Please fill out the questionnaire, really, really helps. Don't complain that the event hasn't been to your liking and then sort of don't say why, or say it's been delightful and say why. Share your idea tab. You want to keep sharing, that's where you go. And of course, #MedGold Showcase. Who knows, maybe we can make it trend. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I will never look at my dinner in the same way again. But joking aside, it has been an absolutely complex, compelling and fascinating topic. And it's been really a pleasure to get to know this project that even yesterday, I mean, everybody has really praised it, but according to the CINEA call coordinator and project manager who joined us, Sasha Zavadlav, she praised it for its meaningful co-design process and what she thought perhaps it didn't know, but it's really helpful contribution to EU policy strategies. So I think that's high praise indeed. And Mark himself today said, Mark Gisham, seeing how it has all come together beautifully has been a pleasure. So thanks for having me. Stay safe as spring gets more underway. Avoid that frost if you're in France on Saturday, Sunday and Monday. And much passion in your ongoing adventures. I wish you an excellent rest of the day. Don't forget, 2:15, there's one more 45-minute session. Thanks, that's it from me, Katrina Sickle.